Hello there. Tonight we slip barefoot into the cold, damp reality of medieval life, where the floor is mud, the air is musty, and your straw mattress is probably hiding fleas the size of your thumb. You open your eyes in a smoky one-room cottage, where daylight peeks through the cracks in wattle and daub. Your nose wrinkles instantly. That smell? It's a potent mix of unwashed family members, goat droppings, and the chamber pot no one's emptied since last week. You stretch, but the ache in your lower back reminds you that comfort isn't really a thing here. Your joints throb. You're 15, but your body feels 60. The ground beneath your blanket crunches faintly, a few beetles scurrying back to their hidey holes as your movement stirs them. Oh, and your blanket? It's a moth-eaten patchwork of coarse wool that smells like mildew and wet barn. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm curious what corner of the modern world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You roll to the edge of the bed. Not that there's an edge, it's just a pile of straw on the floor, and some of it's matted with something suspiciously dark. Maybe dried blood. Maybe rat droppings. You're not going to check. You slip your feet into the mud. Yes, the floor is just that, mud. It's not waterproof. It's not even slightly dry. There's no tile, no wood planks, just cold, wet earth. Congratulations, you've officially started your day in the Middle Ages. Your clothes? Let's be generous and call them homespun. A linen shift stained from last week's stew accident, a tunic that's never once met soap, and shoes, if you have them, that are either wooden clogs or leather strips laced with twine. They don't fit, they rub your heel raw, and one toe's already peeking through a hole. Your breath fogs in the air. It's spring, but inside your home it's barely warmer than outside. You huddle near the central hearth, where a smoky fire has smoldered all night, trying to keep the edge off the cold. It didn't. Mostly it just turned the entire room into a low-grade sauna with poor ventilation. Your lungs itch, your eyes water, and everyone's coughing, except your cousin Thomas, who isn't coughing anymore. You think that might be a bad sign. Historically speaking, many medieval peasants lived in what historians call cruck houses, wooden frames with walls filled in with a plaster made of clay, straw, and animal dung. The roofs were thatched, which meant they were excellent places for rodents, birds, and all manner of insects to settle in. In fact, there's a fringe theory, scholars still argue whether it's true, that this is where the phrase raining cats and dogs originated. Animals occasionally fell through collapsing thatch during storms. You step outside. The morning dew has soaked the fields, and the air carries the sour-sweet tang of composting everything. The pig pen is close to the house, too close, and the pigs, while adorable in their own feral way, are wallowing in what can only be described as a slurry of yesterday's dinner and whatever passed through their digestive system overnight. Your neighbors are already up. You hear the rhythmic thump of someone beating laundry on a rock down by the stream, and further off, the creak of a cartwheel trying desperately to survive another muddy season. People move slowly, not out of laziness, but because they're already tired. Life in the Middle Ages begins at sunrise and ends when the sun dips behind the trees, or when your body gives out, whichever comes first. You're expected in the fields. Doesn't matter if you're 12 or 70. The soil doesn't plow itself, and neither do the weeds pull their own roots. You grab a wooden hoe, it's splintered at the grip, because of course it is, and head out, squelching through the mud, passing the church bell that tolls at random intervals. Not to tell time, mind you. Most peasants couldn't afford a sundial, let alone understand hours. The bell just sort of reminds everyone that God is watching. And so is the reeve, the village enforcer of the Lord's will. You glance at the manor up on the hill. It's not exactly Versailles. More like a glorified barn with a stone base. But to you, it might as well be Olympus. That's where the Lord lives, the one who owns everything you touch, including your own body, technically. You need permission to marry. Permission to fish. Permission to leave. And if you don't get that permission, well, there's a muddy pit and some shackles with your name on them. Fun fact, peasants weren't technically slaves, but serfdom was just fancy bondage. You couldn't sell yourself, but you also couldn't free yourself. You were part of the land, like a rock or a tree. If the land was sold, you were sold with it. Your destiny was plowing soil, paying taxes in grain, and trying not to make eye contact with anyone in chainmail. You reach the field. It's not a field so much as a patch of stubborn dirt with more rocks than actual earth. Your job? Turn it over, one back-breaking row at a time. No tractor, no gloves, no playlist in your ears, just the sound of your own labored breathing and the occasional crow cackling like it knows something you don't. Here's your first modern shocker: most medieval peasants didn't eat much meat. Pigs and chickens were too valuable alive for eggs and manure. If you killed one, it was usually because it got sick. Your daily meals? Think oat porridge, brown bread, and the occasional turnip. If you're lucky, there's a stale hunk of cheese that smells like foot and fights back when you chew it. As you work, you notice your hands blistering. Again. The skin on your palms is like parchment, thin and cracked. Last week you got a splinter that hasn't healed. It's red now. Warm to the touch. Your aunt thinks it's a curse. You suspect it's infection. There's no antiseptic here, just a prayer, a poultice made of moss and spit, and hope. Spoiler, it's not going to work. And here's where the dread creeps in. You can feel it, can't you? The slow realization that there's no escape. No weekend. No holiday. No coffee shop where you can vent to friends about your terrible job and worse boss. This is your life. Every day. Until your back breaks, your lungs give out, or the next plague rides in on the back of a flea. But hey, at least your feet are warm now. Because the mud finally soaked through your shoes. You can feel it pulsing now, that dull, angry throb behind your molars. It started as a little ache last week, after you gnawed on some of that stale barley bread your neighbor's goat wouldn't even sniff. But now it's unmistakable, you've got a toothache. And in the Middle Ages, a toothache isn't just a minor inconvenience. It's a terrifying, festering prelude to something much worse. There's no toothpaste, no floss, no emergency dentist to call. You reach into your mouth with a dirt-lined fingernail and prod the gum. It bleeds. Of course it does. Your teeth, stained brown from a lifetime of coarse grain and no hygiene, are loose, wiggling like they're not fully committed to staying in your skull. You spit. It's pink with blood. You could go see the doctor if you're feeling brave. But in this century, that word covers a suspiciously broad range of professions. Your village barber, for instance, doubles as the local surgeon. That means he cuts your hair and your skin. He's got a leather apron, a few rusty tools, and a smile that suggests he's overly familiar with screams. So you shuffle over to his hut, which smells overwhelmingly of old soap and iron. He takes a look at your swollen cheek and does that thing where a person sucks in air through their teeth, which is never a good sign. Then he holds up what looks like a pair of metal pliers. No gloves, no anesthetic. Just pliers and prayer. Oh, and maybe a little ale if you're lucky, enough to numb your courage. Extraction was the go-to dental solution for centuries. If a tooth hurt, they didn't ask why. They just yanked it out. Infection? Yank. Cavity? Yank. Gums bleeding? Definitely yank. And there's no guarantee it won't break mid-pull, leaving you with an exposed root and a lecture on divine punishment. There's also trepanation. Ever heard of it? It's where they drill a hole into your skull to let out bad humors. Yes, this was a real practice. Historians still argue whether it was more symbolic than surgical, but skulls from the period show clear evidence of repeated, sometimes healed, trepanation. So it was done enough to leave scars or to kill the patient trying. In some circles, they believed it relieved headaches, seizures, or even mental illness. You wouldn't call it effective, exactly, but you definitely call it memorable. Back in the barber's hut, your treatment begins. He wraps a stained cloth around your head to keep you from jerking too much. He mumbles something that sounds vaguely like a prayer. Then, clamp. The metal bites down on your molar. You flinch. He pulls. You scream. He twists. You taste metal and something bitter and hot. One more tug, and the tooth gives way, accompanied by a popping sound you'll never forget. Blood pours into your mouth. No gauze. Just another piece of that same cloth, now pressed against your lips. You're shaking. He tells you to bite down hard and don't spit for an hour. You nod, dizzy, and lurch outside. That's the best case scenario. Worst case? The infection spreads. The pain worsens. Your jaw swells to twice its size, and your body, with no antibiotics or real understanding of bacteria, gives up. You die days later, hallucinating and feverish, surrounded by people debating whether it was demons or swamp air that killed you. Dental hygiene wasn't really a concept yet. People might chew mint or sage to freshen their breath, or use sticks to scrape their teeth, but plaque, decay, and gum disease were rampant. There's a quirky note in some monastic records of monks being reprimanded for using toothpicks too often. Apparently, even basic oral care was frowned upon if it seemed vain. So yes, you'll miss your electric toothbrush. You'll miss clean water, fluoride, and the luxury of complaining about dentist bills on social media. Because here? It's not about cost, it's about survival. But maybe you'll try something herbal, you think. There's a woman in the next village who brews remedies from plants and tree bark. She's old, always smells like damp moss, and her hut is strung with bundles of drying leaves. You visit her, holding your cheek, eyes watering from pain. She offers you a mixture of crushed willow bark, honey, and warm water. You sip it. It's bitter, but your stomach's so used to disappointment it hardly reacts. Here's your fringe tidbit for the night. Some medieval folk believed that a worm was living inside your tooth and causing the pain. In fact, this tooth worm theory persisted well into the 18th century. Illustrations show little curly worms squirming around a tooth root, being blamed for cavities and bad breath. It wasn't remotely true, but it gave people something to blame besides their 3-loaf-a-day bread diet. After your herbal sip, the woman burns some incense, mutters something in Latin-sounding gibberish, and pokes your temples with a piece of heated bone. You don't feel cured, but you do feel oddly relaxed. Maybe that's all she can offer, a temporary placebo and the comfort of being cared for. The sun sets. You return home, still aching. You lie on your straw bed again, head throbbing, heart heavy. You think about how many times in the future someone will complain about getting a root canal, and how you'd trade 3 goats and your best tunic for that luxury right now. Sleep comes slowly. Every thump in your jaw is a reminder, here in the Middle Ages, pain is your constant companion. And no one's writing down your medical records. No charts. No follow-ups. If you wake up tomorrow with lockjaw or a neck swollen like a melon, well, let's just say your village priest will already have his funeral robes ready. And he's also the guy who once advised someone to drink hot urine for their cough. But that's another story. Bath time has arrived. Or rather, it should have arrived weeks ago, but here you are, itchy, grimy, and reeking of earth, smoke, sweat, and something you're not sure how to describe, only that it lingers in your armpits like a medieval ghost. Still, you've reached the threshold. It's happening. You're about to bathe. Let's just say, lower your expectations. In the Middle Ages, bathing was a bit like a group project where everyone failed. It's not that people never washed, there's a popular myth that they avoided it entirely. But when they did wash, it wasn't often, and it was rarely pretty. Public bathhouses existed in some places, especially in larger towns and cities. But for most peasants like you, it's a wooden tub in the center of the room, filled with water you heated over the fire. And you're not the first one in. Not even close. Remember your father? He bathed yesterday. The same tub. The same water. Covered now with a thin, shimmering film that glistens like oil but smells like regret. Your siblings took turns after him, then your mother, your cousins, and possibly even a neighbor who just needed to soak his feet. Now it's your turn. The water is cold. There's hay stuck to the side. And something brown is floating on top. You do not ask what it is. Your clothes come off with effort, damp fabric clings like guilt. You step in. The water greets you with a sharp slap of chill. You hiss. Sit. Shudder. Scrub yourself with a cloth that used to be white but now seems permanently dyed the color of bad stew. You do your best. You rub your arms raw, trying to remove the grime that's become part of your skin's personality. But there's no soap, just lye or ashes, if you're lucky. Otherwise, you rely on sand or salt to scrape the dirt off, which is as gentle as it sounds. Meanwhile, your uncle walks by and comments, "Don't use all the clean water." You blink. What clean water? Historians still argue whether rural folk bathed more or less frequently than urbanites. There's some evidence that peasants who lived near rivers would dunk themselves more regularly, especially in summer, but regular full-body washing? Not common. Not practical. Not even seen as especially healthy by some medieval thinkers. In fact, by the later Middle Ages, many people feared that hot water opened the pores and let disease in. The more elite the person, the less likely they were to bathe. Nobles might change their linens frequently and call that cleanliness. One 14th century French noblewoman was praised for bathing, wait for it, once a month. That was considered borderline obsessive. You sigh and lower yourself deeper into the tub. The lukewarm water laps at your chest, swirling slightly with each movement, growing murkier by the second. You catch your reflection in the surface. Hair like hay, cheeks hollow from poor diet, eyes shadowed with fatigue. You don't look older than your age, you look medieval. Suddenly, there's a knock. The door creaks open. Your little brother peeks in. "Are you done yet?" he asks. "Ma says it's my turn." You grit your teeth and dunk your head under, letting the filmy water coat your scalp. You emerge coughing and wet, feeling strangely less clean than before. Public bathhouses, when available, were a different beast altogether. In places like Paris or London, you might pay a coin to sit in a room with strangers, soak in a giant shared tub, and listen to local gossip. Some bathhouses had attendants who'd scrub your back. Others offered more adult services. By the late Middle Ages, many bathhouses were shut down for being thinly veiled brothels. In fact, stews was the nickname for bathhouses because they stewed people. Charming, right? The church, predictably, was not a fan. They warned against mixed bathing, excessive nudity, and pleasure in general. Monks were allowed to bathe a few times a year, usually around Easter and Christmas. But only if absolutely necessary. Cleanliness may have been next to godliness, but not if it involved warm water and even a whiff of enjoyment. You dry off with a rag that's more moisture than fabric. There's no towel as you know it, just a piece of cloth that's been hung over the hearth to dry and now smells like smoke and soup. You wipe yourself down and pull on your stiff, scratchy tunic again. You're clean, technically. But only in the way that burnt toast is technically food. And here's a quirky detail: in some communities, urine was considered useful for cleaning. That's right, aged human urine, left to ferment into ammonia-rich chamber lye, was used to bleach linen, soften hides, and yes, sometimes even scrub bodies. So next time someone tries to sell you a natural skincare product, remember that your ancestors might have been exfoliating with pee. You step outside, hair dripping, body steaming faintly in the cool air. It's twilight now. The birds have stopped singing, and smoke curls from chimneys like medieval Wi-Fi signals. You're clean for now. But tomorrow, you'll sweat again. You'll roll in the mud while tending pigs. You'll spill ale on your tunic. And you'll go to bed greasy, knowing your next bath is probably weeks away. Still, that first breath of cool, fresh air against your damp skin? Almost worth it. Almost. You thought you were free. You thought you could do what you wanted, go where you pleased, maybe open a cozy bakery, fall in love under a maypole. Cute, right? But no. You're not a free person. You're part of the feudal system now, which means your life is less choose-your-own-adventure and more indentured servitude, but with extra mud. Welcome to feudalism, where you don't own your land, your time, or even your own body. You're a serf. A vassal. A breathing tax deduction for your lord. The deal is simple. He lets you work a plot of land, called a hide or a vergate, depending on size, and in return, you owe him your labor, your crops, your livestock, and basically your soul. You can't move away without permission. You can't marry someone from the next village over without his blessing. And if you die, your kids inherit your status along with your wooden shovel. Feudalism isn't just a job description, it's a cage. And the door's been welded shut with 11th century laws. Your lord? He lives in that stone manor on the hill, probably with a drawbridge, a moat, and at least one tapestry featuring someone stabbing a dragon. He's not royalty, but he's close enough that he'll expect you to bow, avert your eyes, and possibly kiss his ring. Meanwhile, his steward makes sure your rent is paid, in barley, eggs, or the occasional duck. Money isn't always the currency of choice here. Grain is king. And you'd better hand over enough at harvest or risk a fine, or worse. You start your day early. Not because you're ambitious, but because you're required. Sunrise means it's time to gather your tools and head to the Lord's domain, his personal farmland that you're obligated to work a few days a week for free. Your own crops can wait. And if they die while you're plowing someone else's oats? Too bad. Historians still argue whether all serfs were equally oppressed or if some had it marginally better. It's possible a clever or lucky peasant might negotiate better terms, or marry into a slightly freer village. But for most, it was a life sentence written in mud and manure. Oh, and don't expect contracts or formal rules written down for you. Literacy is rare, and everything runs on tradition, rumor, and the occasional shout from the reeve. That's the local enforcer of your lord's will, a man who knows exactly how many chickens you owe and isn't afraid to show up and collect. You sigh, wiping your brow as you lug another bundle of firewood up the lane. Your hands are calloused, your back permanently hunched, and your knees ache like you've run a marathon every day since birth. But what choice do you have? If you disobey, the consequences are swift. Fines, floggings, or being thrown into the stocks. And yes, the stocks are exactly as fun as they look: public punishment via wooden shackles, flies in your mouth, and a tomato to the face if your neighbors are feeling particularly festive. You've probably fantasized about leaving, haven't you? Maybe slipping away in the night, taking a donkey and heading toward the nearest town where you could reinvent yourself as a brewer or a juggler or something equally impressive. But if you try that, and someone catches you, you're a fugitive serf. You can be dragged back by force, flogged, and possibly have extra duties added to your already back-breaking schedule. One chronicler even mentions a case where a runaway serf was branded with a hot iron. So, maybe don't. Instead, you stay. You tend the Lord's fields. You mend his fences. You help build his granary. He throws you a crust of bread on feast days and reminds you that it's all part of God's plan. Speaking of which, there's no separation between church and landlord. Your obedience is spiritual as well as economic. Disobey your Lord, and you're not just breaking the law, you're flirting with eternal damnation. Neat, right? And just when you think you've got the hang of this system, your Lord decides to go on crusade or marry off his daughter, and guess what? You're expected to provide aid and service. That could mean more taxes, more labor, or even your own son being drafted to fight someone else's holy war. Here's a quirky historical tidbit: there were actual merchant payments, fees that peasants paid to their lords for permission to let their daughters marry. Love, but with paperwork and grain. It's unclear if that tradition was enforced strictly everywhere, but the fact that it existed at all tells you everything you need to know about how little autonomy you actually have. And the lord of the manor isn't always around. Sometimes he's off at court or in battle, leaving his affairs to a bailiff who has none of the charm and twice the cruelty. He'll inspect your plowing work with the intensity of a modern performance review, and you will fail. You always fail. That ridge wasn't straight enough. That furrow's too shallow. That wheat is 6 inches short and it's your fault. But hey, at least you're not a villain. Oh wait, you are a villain. That's the charming legal term for peasants who were tied to the land. And no, it's not the same as villain, but the similarity is fitting. In medieval legal texts, being a villain meant you couldn't testify in court against a freeman. Your word didn't count. You were, legally, lesser. So next time you grumble about a boring job or a bad manager, remember, at least your boss can't legally whip you. At least you can quit. You can switch careers, start a blog, open a candle shop on Etsy. You have choices. Here, you're born into service. You die in service. And the closest thing you get to a promotion is being assigned a slightly larger turnip field. And yet, despite all this, people survive. Families joke over meals. Songs are sung at harvest festivals. You find joy in small things: a warm loaf, a dry bed, a bird call at dawn. But the system is unshakable. It's older than you, bigger than you, and it sees you as exactly what you are, one more body in the gears of feudal society. So, you shoulder your hoe. You bow when the steward passes. And you trudge onward, knowing that if reincarnation is real, you're definitely hoping for the 21st century next time around. You're hungry again. Not the kind of hungry that modern people complain about after skipping brunch. This is deep, marrow-level hunger, a growling emptiness that never really leaves. Your stomach has learned to make peace with disappointment. And now it's dinner time, or what passes for it in the Middle Ages. Your meal? Gruel. Again. It's a sort of beige sludge, a mix of oats or barley boiled in water, maybe with a pinch of salt if someone was feeling luxurious. You stir it slowly, watching as a tiny weevil floats to the surface. You pick it out with your fingernail and flick it onto the dirt floor. Waste not, want not. There's a stale hunk of bread on the table, hard enough to hammer nails. You dip it in the gruel to soften it, chew slowly, and try not to crack a tooth. There's an onion, too, half mushy, half spicy, all yours. It might be your only vegetable of the day. Contrary to the fantasy images of long banquet tables and roasted meats, the average medieval diet was repetitive, bland, and heavily dependent on what the land could offer, which, let's be honest, wasn't much. You didn't shop. You foraged, grew, or bartered. And meat? Oh no, that was reserved for the wealthy. If you're a peasant, meat is a luxury, something you might taste a few times a year, typically on feast days. And even then, it's more bone than substance. A pig's foot boiled until it melts into broth. A pigeon, if you're fast and sneaky. A bit of salted fish, if you live near the coast or a generous monk is feeling charitable. And let's not forget, it's Lent half the year. Seriously. Over 150 days are considered fasting days by the church, meaning meat, dairy, and even eggs are often forbidden. So your diet isn't just constrained by poverty, it's spiritually regulated. Want a sausage in March? Better hope it's shaped like a fish and blessed by a priest. Your cooking methods don't help much, either. Everything goes into the same cauldron: vegetables, grains, old bones, maybe a sprig of herbs if you can find them. The result is something technically edible but not exactly joyful. Stews bubble over open hearths, smoked out and stirred with wooden spoons so scorched they look fossilized. And yet, despite the simplicity, you depend on this meal. You eat slowly, reverently. Every scrap matters. The bread crust you'd normally toss today might be the main course tomorrow. Historians still argue whether the medieval diet was healthier than modern processed food. Some say peasants had decent nutrition from all the fiber and whole grains. Others point out the rampant vitamin deficiencies, constant malnutrition, and the very short life expectancy. Let's just say it was less about nutrition science and more about staying alive one spoonful at a time. As you eat, you think about your teeth again. That molar never healed right. You chew on the left side only now. And that's tricky because the barley bread is full of grit. Not seasoning, actual grit. Medieval milling stones dropped little flecks of rock into the flour, and those flecks wore your teeth down like sandpaper. Archaeologists have found skulls with molars ground nearly flat. You're on your way. And speaking of odd ingredients, some medieval recipes called for things like ox gall, nettles, or fermented fish paste. One fringe but fascinating tidbit? In parts of northern Europe, people made something called sourdough soup, a bitter blend of wild sorrel, sour milk, and whatever else hadn't spoiled yet. Deliciously tragic. You glance at your neighbor's plate. She's gnawing on a boiled hoof. No, not a metaphor, a literal cow hoof. It's been cooked for hours to loosen the gelatin and sinew. It wobbles when she pokes it. She sighs and bites in. No desserts, by the way. Maybe a dried apple, if you've got one hidden in a thatch rafter. Sugar is expensive, almost mythical. You've heard of it, like unicorns or proper sanitation. Honey is more common, but it's guarded by bees and beekeepers, both equally angry. Drinks. Ale. Not the fun kind either. It's weak, flat, and brewed with cloudy water that may or may not have been used to wash the family's only tunic. But it's safer than straight river water, which is teeming with delightful things like cholera and frog eggs. Milk is rare, it's for calves. Watered wine, if you're lucky. Mead, if someone died and left behind a surprise inheritance. Dinner ends without fanfare. No table talk. No seconds. You scrape the bowl, lick your fingers, and wrap the bread crust in cloth for later. Tomorrow you'll eat again, some version of the same thing. Maybe rye mash. Maybe cabbage stew. You can't be picky. And this isn't just home life, this is everywhere. In manors, taverns, monasteries, the fare is slightly different, but the theme is the same: simple, heavy, and repetitive. Even nobles, with all their roasted swans and sugar sculptures, faced long winters of dried beans and salted meats. A fancy meal was reserved for holy days or feasts, and even then, only if your estate hadn't flooded again. One last sensory note: your clothes now smell like the meal. Smoke, boiled onions, and wood ash have settled into the fabric of your tunic, as if your dinner clung to you for dear life. You scratch your arm absent-mindedly. The fleas agree, they're fans of barley gruel, too. So, you wipe your hands on your thighs, sigh, and toss a bone to the floor. The dog snatches it. The fire pops behind you. And you wonder, again, what it might be like to taste something truly sweet. Maybe in the next life. You smell it before you see it, the stench of your medieval town. It drifts on the breeze like an unwanted guest, thick with the unmistakable perfume of rot, excrement, spoiled meat, and damp hay. Your nose twitches. Your eyes water. Your soul briefly tries to exit your body. Welcome home. Let's get one thing straight: medieval towns were not charming little storybook villages with singing bakers and flower boxes. They were crowded, chaotic, and saturated with smells that could singe your eyebrows. And it wasn't just a bad day, it was every day. You step through the crooked gate into the bustling market square, and the first thing that greets you is a suspicious puddle. What's in it? Better not to ask. It could be rain, blood, ale, or something from the tanner's dump. The streets are unpaved, turning into muddy soup when it rains and dusty sludge when it's dry. You sidestep a cartwheel rut so deep it could legally qualify as a well. Now, the smell: imagine raw sewage, fermented cabbage, horse sweat, and open-air fish guts, then leave that out in the sun for a few hours. People are selling meat in the open air, no refrigeration in sight. Flies hover like they pay rent. Blood pools beneath wooden stalls where pigs and chickens were butchered this morning, their remains only half cleared. Somewhere, a dog is gnawing on a hoof, blissfully unaware of how offensive its meal is to your entire respiratory system. Tanners, those lovely folks who turn animal hides into leather, are boiling cow skins in urine and lying down by the river. That scent? Oh yes, that's real. Ammonia-rich vats bubble gently as someone stirs them with a stick. Your eyes sting just walking past. Want another fun fact? They sometimes use dog feces to soften hides. A lovely little process called baiting. Yes, your shoes are essentially soaked in history and poop. And speaking of poop, everyone is dumping it into the street. Chamber pots are casually flung from second-story windows. There is a warning cry, "Garde-lou," in some cities, which is your only chance to dodge what's coming. But if you're not fast? Well, let's just say medieval laundry soap is weak and dignity is fragile. There are no sewers. Not really. Just open ditches called kennels that run down the middle of the street, theoretically channeling wastewater away. In practice? They overflow. They back up. They attract rats, which attract fleas, which attract plague. And you, standing there ankle-deep in civilization, are just trying to buy a turnip. Historians still argue whether medieval urban life was worse than rural living. On one hand, towns offered better markets, more job variety, and access to a church that wasn't 6 muddy miles away. On the other, they came with disease outbreaks, overcrowding, filth, and the constant fear that your neighbor's roof might collapse onto yours during a storm. Let's talk about smells inside your home, too. You might think escaping the streets would bring relief. Nope. The scent just changes. Your house smells of smoke, damp wood, animal hair, and feet. Your cooking fire is also your heating source and your chimney? Optional. Most cottages vent smoke through a hole in the roof. So, soot clings to everything, your walls, your clothes, your lungs. Quirky tidbit, some people hung herbs and flowers from ceiling beams to mask the smell. It didn't work. It just made the air smell like bad soup and lavender. Back in the square, the baker is at work. Bread, you think. That should smell nice. And it does, briefly, until you remember he bakes over an open flame fueled with dried animal dung. That gives it a certain earthy gene. But you still buy a loaf because you're starving, and dung-baked bread is still better than nothing. Meanwhile, someone is sweeping the street with a straw broom, mostly just pushing muck around. A child runs by barefoot, splashing through a puddle with the enthusiastic immunity of someone who has never heard the words bacterial infection. You glance toward the well and see a woman lowering a bucket carefully. It's the cleanest water in town, if no one's dumped anything shady into it lately. But water isn't always trusted. People often drink weak ale instead, less likely to kill you. The brewer's stall is right next to the fishmonger's, which is a cruel arrangement for the senses. You pass by quickly, clutching your loaf, trying to breathe through your mouth. And then, just to complete the horror, a cart rolls through carrying something covered in cloth. You know what's under there. Everyone knows. Another body. The plague is back on again. That makes, 3 times this year? The graveyard is full, the church bell rings more for burials than weddings, and there's talk of digging a new pit just beyond the east wall. One big communal grave. Efficiency, medieval style. The dead aren't embalmed. They're buried quickly, wrapped in linen if available, naked if not. No headstone. No ceremony if it's plague, just a prayer, a shove, and a hope that the rats stay away long enough to fill in the dirt. Some towns had designated death carts that rolled through each morning to collect the newest victims. Imagine that as your wake-up call. So yes, your town stinks. Not metaphorically. Literally. Constantly. Your nose will never forgive you. And here's the kicker, after a while, you stop noticing. Your senses dull. The smell becomes the background hum of your day, like white noise but brown. You only really notice it when a noble rides through, holding a perfumed cloth to their nose, sneering at the stink of the common folk. You glance at them, their fine silks trailing dust, and wonder what it must be like to smell like nothing for once. But you don't have time to daydream. Someone's yelling. A butcher's apprentice slipped in entrails again. You sidestep the splash, clutch your bread tighter, and head home, eyes stinging, nose offended, feet soaked in a stew of history. Welcome to town life in the Middle Ages. It's a real breath of fresh, nope. Never mind. The village healer says it's just bad blood. The priest says it's punishment for unconfessed sins. Your neighbor swears it's because you walked past the graveyard during a new moon. But you know the truth. You're sick, and nobody knows what to do with you. You wake up with a fever. Your limbs feel heavy, your head pounds like a festival drum, and there's something off. It's that particular kind of off where you know your body is about to do something dramatic and very unpleasant. You stumble to your feet, wobbling like a newborn goat, and reach for help. In the Middle Ages, medicine is not what you're used to. Forget checkups, specialists, or even the word sanitation. Your choices for treatment are a roulette wheel of superstition, guesswork, and, if you're really lucky, a sharp knife and someone who claims to know how to use it. You're bundled in a scratchy wool blanket and dragged to the village's designated healer, a mix between a midwife, herbalist, and someone who definitely talks to plants. She's in a hut strung with dried roots and feathers, and she peers at your swollen glands like they've personally offended her. She pulls out a handful of dried yarrow, mutters something in Old English, and begins to mash the herbs with a rock. Then comes the treatment, a poultice for your chest, a bitter tea to make you sweat, and a red-hot iron poker held alarmingly close just in case something needs draining. Your lips part to protest, but it's too late. Mainstream medieval medical theory is based on the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. You get sick because your humours are out of balance. So, logically, they try to balance them. How? By bleeding you, purging you, or making you vomit. If your healer has access to leeches, congrats. You now get to feel like a particularly unlucky frog in a biology class. The barber surgeon makes another appearance here. If the healer thinks your humours need serious realignment, you're sent to him. His cure-all for everything from headaches to broken limbs? Bloodletting. He'll slice open a vein, collect the blood in a bowl, and wait until you turn pale enough that he can declare you cleansed. You, meanwhile, are seeing stars and wondering if your spirit is leaving your body. And if that doesn't work, there's always purging. You'll be handed a concoction of herbs so noxious they could double as paint stripper, rhubarb root, senna leaves, and if you're fancy, a pinch of powdered emerald. That's not a joke. There's a fringe historical theory that crushed gems were thought to cure certain illnesses. Historians still argue whether anyone truly believed in the gemstone cure or if it was more about showing off your wealth while dying dramatically. Let's say you have a fever. You're told to wear red because it draws out the heat. Someone ties a garlic clove around your neck. Another person insists you should sleep with a dead toad under your pillow. You try it. Your dreams are terrible. In the background of all this, the priest offers prayers. Sometimes, healing is treated as a moral failing. If you're sick, it's because you've sinned. So there's confession, penance, and possibly holy water poured over your blistering forehead. And if you recover? It was divine intervention. If you die? Well, God works in mysterious ways. Hospitals, as you know them, don't exist yet. The ones that do exist are more like hostels for the dying. Run by monks or nuns, they offer a bed, a bit of soup, and some soft chanting. The focus is on your soul, not your recovery. You're expected to make peace with your fate, preferably without moaning too loudly and disturbing the next cot over. You lie back on your pallet, sweating through your tunic, staring at the smoke-stained rafters. The healer tells you the sickness will run its course. You nod weakly. What she really means is, we'll see if your immune system can pull off a miracle. Spoiler alert, it probably won't. And let's not forget childbirth. If you're a woman, giving birth is the single most dangerous thing you will ever do. There are no prenatal vitamins. No ultrasounds. Just a group of midwives and relatives, boiling water and whispering prayers. If the baby is breech? If the cord wraps? If the labor lasts too long? There's nothing they can do. You, the baby, or both of you might not make it. And if you do survive? You get to go back to the fields the following week. Quirky side note, one of the strangest cures for illness involved reading your urine. A urine wheel, a sort of color-coded diagnostic chart, helped determine your condition based on the appearance and smell of your sample. Pale yellow? Healthy? Murky brown with foam? You're in trouble. Oddly enough, they weren't entirely wrong. Urine can be an indicator of health. But it's not exactly foolproof when your entire treatment plan involves drinking nettle water and hoping for the best. You drift into a feverish sleep, sweating through the wool, your lips parched and cracked. You dream of ice, of clean sheets, of aspirin, of air conditioning. You wake to the sound of someone vomiting into a bucket next to you. The healer pats your head. "That's a good sign," she says cheerfully. And you believe her. Because what other option do you have? Here, illness isn't an event, it's a way of life. You will always be battling some minor infection, some mysterious ache, some injury that never quite healed right. You're alive by a thread spun between dirt, prayer, and sheer luck. So when someone in your time complains about being stuck in a waiting room for 45 minutes, maybe whisper this story into their ear. And then offer them a leech, just for fun. You're innocent. Completely, unequivocally, absurdly innocent. But none of that matters now, because you're standing in the village square with your feet in stocks and a crowd gathering like flies around a dung cart. And the baker's wife just threw a cabbage at your head. Welcome to medieval justice, where guilt is optional, evidence is creative, and trials are often more dramatic than conclusive. Justice in the Middle Ages is a game of chance you never signed up for. There are no lawyers for people like you. No appeals process. No comforting phrase like "you're entitled to a fair trial." Instead, you get angry neighbors, arbitrary lords, and the delightful possibility of trial by ordeal. Let's rewind to how this started. Someone's pig went missing. You were seen walking near that pig pen. The pig is gone. Now suddenly you're Pig Thief of the Year, and everyone's convinced you traded the animal for 3 onions and a suspicious hunk of cheese. You didn't. But your denial is just background noise now. In some areas, you might get a court hearing, a manorial court, presided over by your lord or his steward. Sounds official, but it's more like a village drama club with actual consequences. The local reeve reads out the accusations while a handful of peasants try to remember what they think they saw. Eyewitness testimony? Usually just rumors shouted with confidence. Cross-examination? You wish. And if the issue is serious, or just complicated, then things get more intense. Enter the trial by ordeal. Let's say you're asked to prove your innocence with a red-hot iron. That's not a metaphor. You'll be handed an actual glowing rod and told to carry it 3 paces. Then they'll bandage your hand and wait 3 days. If it's infected, you're guilty. If it's healing? Innocent. Or at least divinely favored. Because God, they believe, will intervene to protect the blameless. Not exciting enough? There's also trial by water. You're bound and tossed into a pond. If you sink, you're innocent. Problem is, you also drown. If you float? Guilty. Because clearly you've used witchcraft or some unnatural means to defy nature. In this scenario, survival is literally incriminating. Historians still argue whether these trials were symbolic or sincere. Some say they were theatre designed to pressure confessions. Others suggest local clergy truly believed divine judgment played out through fire and water. Either way, they weren't uncommon. And they weren't kind. Feeling lucky? Maybe you'll get trial by combat. Yes, even if you're not a fighter. You or someone willing to take your place fights your accuser. The winner proves righteousness through strength, or at least stamina. Imagine trying to prove you didn't steal a chicken by surviving a mace to the ribs. That's justice, medieval style. You don't get to pick your ordeal. It picks you. and sometimes it picks at random. But let's say you escape all that and just get publicly punished. Maybe the court finds you probably guilty and sentences you to a day in the pillory. That's the one where your head and hands are locked in a wooden frame while the townsfolk entertain themselves with jeers, spit, and expired vegetables. You stand there for hours, neck aching, sunburn creeping across your face, and your dignity leaking out like soup from a cracked bowl. Quirky detail? In some towns, people would mix flour and pig dung to make justice pies to throw at prisoners. It was a civic duty. Like jury service, but squishier. Sometimes, the punishment is a fine. That might sound better, until you realize you have no actual money. You pay in chickens, eggs, sacks of grain. If you can't pay, more labor. Or worse, your family pays. Suddenly your little sister's dinner is cancelled because you were accused of snatching someone's loaf of rye. And let's not pretend everyone is treated equally. If you're a peasant, punishment is swift and humiliating. If you're a noble, you might get house arrest in your private chamber, with cushions. Nobles are tried by their peers, which means a bunch of other wealthy people who all know each other. Convenient. Churchmen get their own version of immunity too. Benefit of clergy, it's called. If you can read a verse from the Bible, you can claim it and be tried in ecclesiastical court instead, where punishments are softer. Fun fact, people started memorizing that one verse, Psalm 51, typically, to fake literacy and dodge the harsher penalties. It became known as the neck verse. Because, it could save your neck. You're not a noble. You're not clergy. So here you are, shaking in your worn shoes, wondering how many bruised apples the crowd still has left to throw. And the worst part? You didn't even do it. The pig probably wandered off. Or maybe it was taken by someone more powerful, someone no one dares accuse. But the villagers need a culprit, and today, you're conveniently available. So justice is served, cold, rotten, and roughly aimed. Eventually, someone declares the punishment fulfilled. You're released from the stocks, arms aching, ego obliterated. You shuffle home. And the pig? It shows up 3 days later in the woods, muddy but very much alive. No apology. No reversal. No compensation. Just another day in the great, grim lottery that is medieval law. Sleep tight tonight. And maybe lock your door, just in case someone loses another pig. He's tall, armored, and looks like he was assembled from spare iron. He thunders past you on a warhorse the size of your cottage, his surcoat billowing in the wind like he's about to joust the sun itself. But make no mistake, this knight is not here for glory. He's here to remind you who's in charge. And spoiler, it's definitely not you. That, my unfortunate friend, is your boss. The local knight. The one who owns the land you plough, the house you sleep in, and technically your loyalty, your taxes, and your occasional Tuesday. He's everything the songs promised: shiny armor, noble blood, massive sword. Except no one told you that knights weren't all chivalry and courtly love, they were more often cranky landlords with a hobby for violence. This particular one, Sir Egbert of wherever, isn't evil exactly. He's just entitled. Spoiled. Convinced that God personally ordained him to rule over everyone with a combination of brute strength and pouty lips. You've seen him train. He swings a sword like a man trying to kill time and an invisible enemy named emotional maturity. His squire follows him around with a polishing rag and a constant air of apology. Knights, you see, were the muscle of the feudal system. In exchange for land, called a fief, they promised their lord military service. In theory, that meant training, patrolling, and going to war. In practice, It also meant they were local enforcers, part-time judges, and full-time intimidators. You know that saying, don't bring a sword to a pitchfork fight? Yeah, Sir Egbert always brings a sword. He visits the village today to inspect the harvest. Translation: he's here to scowl at your work and demand 3 more sacks of barley than you physically grew. You offer him your best bow, careful not to meet his eyes for too long. That's considered rude, or threatening, or uppity. It depends on his mood, and his mood today seems to be dangerously bored. You overhear him scolding another peasant for failing to repair a fence. The man tries to explain there wasn't enough wood. Sir Egbert draws his sword, not to stab, just to gesture, but you flinch anyway. Everyone does. Because he can. Technically, he's not supposed to maim you without cause, but the line between discipline and decoration is blurry when your legal protections amount to try not to scream too loudly. Historians still argue whether the average knight was a heroic protector or a glorified thug with a title. The answer, as usual, is somewhere in between. There were certainly noble knights, men who followed codes of chivalry, protected the weak, and wrote poetry about unattainable love. But for every Lancelot, there were a dozen Egberts, armed, angry, and 1 bad cup of wine away from burning down a thatched roof just to make a point. And don't get too comfortable around the armor either. It's not ceremonial, it's functional. Knights trained relentlessly. Swordplay, lance work, horseback combat. They were the tanks of the medieval battlefield, and when they weren't fighting, they were preparing to. Or looking for a fight. One quirky tidbit: knights sometimes practiced their skills by chasing pigs. No, really. Pig chasing tournaments were recorded in certain regions as a kind of training exercise/community spectacle. Because nothing says honor and steel like a chainmailed man lunging at bacon on legs. Back to your day. Sir Egbert demands hospitality. This is called livery. It means the village provides him with food, drink, a place to nap, and possibly a foot massage if someone's feeling extra unlucky. You bring him stew, thick and hot and served in a wooden bowl. He eats it like a man who's never tasted humility. Then he wipes his mouth with your sleeve. You don't flinch. That would be disrespectful. Oh, and don't forget, this knight can demand military service from you if war breaks out. That's part of his agreement with the king. If the Lord says, "We're off to battle," guess who's carrying his extra sword and holding his horse while arrows fly? Not his cousin, the priest. It's you. The peasant. The unpaid +1 to the bloodbath. You remember last spring, when a skirmish broke out between 2 local barons over who technically owned a half-acre of sheep pasture. Egbert rounded up every able-bodied man in the village to fight on his behalf. You were handed a spear taller than your house and told to stand straight and jab confidently. 3 people died. One of them tripped over a turnip. It was declared a glorious victory. After his inspection, Sir Egbert mounts his horse again and gallops off in a spray of hoof-churned mud. He doesn't say thank you. Why would he? His entire identity is built on being owed everything. You watch him disappear down the lane, half relieved, half dreading the next visit. Maybe he'll bring his hawk again. Last time, it pecked a child. The child was blamed. And here's the irony: your kids probably look up to him. They played knights and dragons with sticks, pretending to be him, not you. No one dreams of growing up to be the guy shoveling manure and handing over turnips as taxes. They want the sword, the horse, the armor, the respect. You can't blame them. But you know better. You know that underneath all that polished steel is a man whose power rests entirely on your obedience and his ability to swing something sharp. You know that no one checks him, corrects him, or really understands him. And that makes him dangerous. You return to your fields, squinting against the sun, ears still ringing from the hooves. Maybe one day your kids won't have to bow to someone just because he has a better helmet. But today? You bow. You bow and you keep your mouth shut. Because your boss is a knight with a temper. And a sword. You hear it before you see it, the low murmur of panicked voices, the creak of cart wheels, and the church bell tolling like it's trying to wake the dead. That sound? It's dread, distilled into noise. You grip your tunic tighter around your chest. It's back. The plague. Again. It starts the same way every time. Someone gets a cough. Then a fever. Then the telltale buboes, those swollen, blackened lumps under the arms or at the groin, angry and tender like bruised fruit. Within days, they're dead. Within weeks, half the village is either buried or dying. The smell of rot replaces the smell of bread. And soon the only thing louder than the coughing is the silence. This isn't the romantic part of history people like to imagine. This is the part where one bad flea can change your entire life. You probably know the term Black Death, the catastrophic pandemic that swept through Europe in the mid-14th century. But what they don't always tell you is that plague didn't just happen once. It came back again and again, like a particularly vengeful boomerang. Outbreaks hit repeatedly for centuries. And every time it did, it hit hard. You stand at the edge of the village square, watching as a small group gathers around the baker's wife. Her son collapsed during morning chores. Now he's fevered, shaking, muttering nonsense. His eyes are glassy. His breath rattles like an old hinge. The midwife steps back. Her face is pale. You all know what this means. In theory, you should quarantine. But in practice, no one knows what to do. Some think it spreads through bad air or miasma, so they burn herbs and hang sweet-smelling flowers around the house. Others say it's divine punishment, so they fast and flagellate, hoping God will call a time out. A few blame the water, or the stars, or the local minority community. That last one leads to violence far too often. Historians still argue whether the public health response was entirely useless or just dramatically insufficient. Some cities, like Venice, had remarkably advanced systems, quarantine islands, dedicated plague hospitals, even protective clothing for doctors. But here, in your little muddy village, quarantine means lighting a bonfire and hoping the smoke scares the germs away. The village priest leads a prayer circle. He's sweating. That's not a great sign. Your lord, of course, has already ridden off. The manor is locked, the gates shut. He's taken his family and gone to the country. You are the country. Which means you're stuck here with the sickness and the fear and the bodies piling up in the corner of the cemetery like cordwood. There's no real treatment. The barber surgeon offers to lance your buboes, slice them open to drain the bad humors. It's agonizing and mostly ineffective. Another healer insists you wear a live chicken around your neck. The idea is the disease will transfer into the chicken. The chicken dies. You survive. Sometimes it even works. Coincidence? Absolutely. A quirky but very real tidbit, some medieval folks believed that bathing opened the pores, making you more vulnerable to plague. So in times of outbreak, they actually bathed less. You, in your increasingly crusty tunic, now have both fear and body odor to contend with. And if you're one of the unlucky ones who catches it, your symptoms are dramatic. Fever, vomiting, necrosis, pain so intense you pray for unconsciousness, and death, usually within days. If not from the plague itself, then from dehydration, starvation, or the general breakdown of society around you. Because when plague hits, everything collapses. Markets close. Crops rot. People abandon their relatives. The few who recover are met with suspicion, as if cheating death somehow made them suspect. You remember the last time it hit. The old man in the village square who claimed he was immune. He wasn't. Or the little girl who survived, but couldn't speak afterward. The trauma took her voice. The silence took everything else. The death carts come again. 2 men pulling a wagon through the village, calling out, "Bring out your dead." You hate how routine it's become. 1 body. Then 5. Then 20. The churchyard fills. Then the ditch. Then the woods. One day, you wake up and realize something strange. It's quiet. The bell has stopped. The coughing is gone. There are fewer voices. Fewer footsteps. Fewer people. You're one of the lucky ones. You sit outside your hut, staring at the empty paths, the shuttered windows, the door that hangs askew on the blacksmith's forge. A week ago, it was alive with hammering and laughter. Now? Not even a whisper. The blacksmith's tools rust gently in the breeze. Survivors wander out like ghosts. Some look dazed. Others weep. A few are already digging graves with shaking hands. There's no time for ceremony. You wrap the bodies in what cloth you can find and lay them in the earth, muttering half-remembered prayers. It feels hollow, like shouting into a storm. Still, life must continue. Or at least, pretend to. You try to repair your garden. You check your neighbor's chickens. You help the priest sweep the chapel steps, though neither of you speaks. And here's the part you didn't expect: the survivors start to change. After a major outbreak, there's sometimes a shift. With fewer people, labor becomes more valuable. Lords must compete for workers. Wages rise. Rules relax. It's not always a permanent change, but for a brief, breathless moment, the social order cracks just enough to let the light in. You wonder if this time will be the same, or if the fear will return before anything can truly improve. Until then, you carry on. Because even with the plague, especially with the plague, there's no one coming to save you. You don't know how to read this sentence. Not because you're tired. Not because you're distracted. But because you never learned. You don't recognize the letters, the shapes, the meaning behind them. They might as well be chicken scratches on bark. And that's not your fault, that's just the Middle Ages doing what it does best, keeping people like you in the dark. In this world, education isn't a right. It's a luxury, and a rare one at that. If you're a peasant, there's a good chance you've never even seen a book, let alone held one. Books are expensive, heavy, and handmade, written out painstakingly by monks who probably resent every moment they're not napping or tending bees. Even if you could get your hands on one, it would be in Latin, which is about as useful to you as a third elbow. And yet, you long for it. There's something magical about the idea of understanding signs, names, messages. But for now, you settle for symbols. A red X scratched on a door means plague. A carved fish over a shop means Christian goods. Your own name, when you need to sign something, is a shaky cross, your mark, because writing it out is beyond reach. You might know a few things by memory. A prayer, a short rhyme, maybe the Lord's Prayer mumbled out of habit rather than belief. But letters? Sentences? That's reserved for the elite, for priests, nobles, and the occasional merchant's child who's lucky enough to be apprenticed to someone with a candle and patience. Historians estimate that during much of the Middle Ages, as many as 90% of the population in Western Europe was illiterate. Even among nobles, full literacy wasn't a given, especially in women. A knight might know how to read a few words, sign his name, maybe decipher a military order. But read for pleasure? That was monk business. Which brings us to the church. The clergy are the keepers of knowledge. Monasteries act like intellectual fortresses, stockpiling books, scrolls, and all the learning that the average villager will never access. Want to learn to read? Become a monk. Want your daughter to learn? Good luck with that. Still, there are exceptions. Some towns have petty schools, early forms of basic education run by priests or lay teachers. But they're small, underfunded, and often only available to boys. And you'd have to give up work during the day, which your family can't afford. You're needed in the field, not at a desk. Quirky tidbit: some children learn their letters using wax tablets, a sort of medieval etch-a-sketch. They trace symbols with a stylus, then smooth it over and start again. It was practical and reusable. Also frustrating, because one slip of the hand could erase an hour's worth of labor. You remember hearing about a boy in the next village who was sent to the abbey school. They said he was smart, could already recite parts of Psalms from memory. His mother cried when he left, partly out of pride, partly because she knew he'd never come back. Education, for most, meant separation. It meant the student was stepping out of the muddy world and into a cloistered one. It wasn't just a change of knowledge, it was a change of class. You, meanwhile, live by oral tradition. Everything important is told, not written. Family stories, local legends, warnings about poisonous herbs or how to avoid bog spirits. Your calendar is a sequence of saints' feast days and moon phases, not dates or diaries. Time is tracked by the ringing of the bell, not by written schedules. And if something needs to be remembered, you sing it. Songs, chants, rhymes, they're how knowledge survives. There's a rhythm to daily life, a kind of musical literacy. You know the planting song, the weaving chant, the rhyme that helps you tell poisonous mushrooms from edible ones. In a way, your brain is a library. A very informal, slightly inconsistent, incredibly valuable library. Still, you can't help but feel the absence. You watch the steward tally grain on a wax ledger and wonder what it would feel like to read those squiggles. To understand how many sacks you've actually delivered and how many are being lost to taxes. Knowledge is power, but you're not allowed to hold it. Just to carry it for someone else. One day, a traveling friar comes through the village. He's literate, of course, and carries a book chained to his belt. It swings as he walks, hitting his hip with every step like a badge of honor. He offers to read a psalm at the chapel. You go, not for salvation, but out of sheer curiosity. His voice echoes, the Latin thick and syrupy. You don't understand a word, but the rhythm pulls at something inside you. Later, you ask what it meant. He tells you it's about humility. About being content in your station. How convenient. He moves on the next morning, book swaying, words still clinging to the air like incense. You go back to your hoe, your sheep, your stew. But something nags at you now, a hunger not in your belly, but behind your eyes. A desire to know, not just survive. And yet, this world wasn't built for that. Education is for the few. You are one of the many. But sometimes, at night, you take a stick and scratch symbols in the dirt by firelight. You don't know what they mean. Not yet. But you will. Maybe not this life. Maybe not this century. But one day, someone like you will read this sentence and know exactly what it says. You're 12, And congratulations, your childhood is officially over. Not because you finished school or hit some kind of magical milestone, but because you're about to be married. To a stranger. Who may or may not be twice your age. And who almost definitely smells like wet wool, onions, and ambition. That's right. In the Middle Ages, marriage isn't about romance or choice. It's an economic transaction. A social arrangement. A land deal wrapped in a tunic and a shaky vow. And your opinion? Adorable, but irrelevant. You sit on a wooden bench, fidgeting with a thread on your sleeve, while the village priest mumbles Latin over a contract. You can't read it, of course. But you recognize your father's worried eyebrows and the serious nod from the man across the table, the one who's essentially purchasing you. He's handing over a goat, 2 sacks of barley, and a promise not to hit you too hard. That's the dowry. Or the bride price. Or both. Historians still argue whether the bride wealth customs in different regions gave women any leverage or just treated them like livestock with braids. The man you're marrying is named Oswin. He's got a good patch of land and a mouthful of crooked teeth. His last wife died in childbirth, but hey, she did leave him a serviceable cottage and a decent batch of cabbages. You smile awkwardly, and he says, "You'll do fine." You try not to shiver. Marriage contracts are often arranged years before the actual wedding. In noble families, betrothals could be signed before the child could walk. Among peasants, it's a bit more flexible, but only just. Your parents decide who's acceptable, and their criteria include how much land he has, whether he's in good standing with the Lord, and whether he can afford the taxes. Your happiness? Not ranked high. And yes, marriage at 12 or 14 isn't uncommon. Especially for girls. For boys, it often happens a little later when they're old enough to work a full field. But once married, you're expected to run a household. Cook. Clean. Bear children. Stitch. Milk the goat. Smile. Repeat. Now, don't picture a white dress or a romantic walk down an aisle. Your wedding is likely a quick ceremony outside the church, followed by bread, weak ale, and maybe some dancing if someone remembered the drum. You wear your best tunic, washed, for once, and a wreath of whatever flowers are still in bloom. The whole village might show up. Not to celebrate you, per se, but because food is food, and your cousin is playing the fiddle. Later that night, you're led into the cottage you now share with your new husband. You lie stiffly on a straw mattress, listening to mice scratch in the walls and wondering if your old bed, hard and familiar, might still be warm. Outside, someone's already gossiping about when you'll get pregnant. It's expected quickly. Your body, still more child than woman, doesn't feel ready. But that doesn't matter. Marriage in this era isn't a partnership of equals. It's hierarchical. Legally, the husband controls the household. If you disobey, he can discipline you. Within reason, of course, but reason is a flexible concept when no one's watching and the law favors male authority. You're expected to be obedient, fertile, and useful. Love? Maybe. Eventually. If you're lucky. Quirky custom time, in some regions, the marriage wasn't considered fully binding until it was physically consummated. Yes, there were witnesses. In extreme cases, there were even ceremonies involving a priest blessing the marriage bed, or nosy relatives hanging around outside the door for confirmation. Subtlety was not a medieval strong suit. And divorce? That's cute. If you're poor, it's nearly impossible. If you're rich, you might technically get an annulment, but only under very specific conditions, like proving the marriage was never consummated, or that you're secretly related, which, given small communities and noble family trees that loop like spaghetti, wasn't uncommon. Otherwise, you're stuck. If your spouse is cruel, unfaithful, or just incredibly boring, the church tells you to bear it. Marriage is sacred, lifelong, a test of virtue. And if you die during childbirth, you were fulfilling your holy duty. So, there's that. Sometimes, though, real affection does grow. You might laugh over spilled stew, hold hands on a walk to the well, sit shoulder to shoulder during feast days, watching candlelight flicker across familiar faces. It's not common, but it happens. Because even in a system designed for control, people still find ways to be human. Still, the economic pressures never leave. If your husband dies, you become a widow, which actually gives you more freedom than you ever had as a wife. Widows could own property, make contracts, and run households without male oversight. But of course, there's a catch. Everyone suddenly wants to marry you again. For the land, the assets, the chance to produce more heirs. You do your best to avoid that fate. You walk slower past the Reeves house. You stop smiling at the miller. You keep your head down. And through it all, you remember that your life, your entire identity, was carved around this moment. The moment you were married. When you were traded for a goat and a patch of turnips. When you smiled because it was expected. When your childhood ended in the shadow of a contract you didn't write and vows you barely understood. So, you take a deep breath. You feed the fire. You mend the hem of your new husband's tunic. And you hope the cabbages are still good. You're 7 years old, and someone just handed you a rake. That's not a toy. It's your new reality. Childhood, as you might imagine it, full of lazy mornings and imaginary dragons and afternoons spent drawing chalk cities on sidewalks, doesn't exist here. Not for you. Not for anyone. In medieval times, 7 is when you stop being adorable and start being useful. From this moment on, you're not a child. You're a tiny adult. Which means you're going to work. Your tasks start small, gathering firewood, feeding chickens, collecting eggs. But they grow quickly. Soon you're hauling water in sloshing wooden pails, weeding fields with sore fingers, or chasing escaped geese across muddy yards like a feather-covered nightmare. You're expected to know when the sow needs feeding, when the oats should be harvested, and how not to burn the stew. Forget toys. Forget school. Your day revolves around survival, and your schedule is synchronized with the rising sun and the rooster's scream. There's no time for daydreaming. No, when I grow up. You are growing up with every chore, every scolding, every cracked blister that no one bothers to bandage. Medieval society didn't really have a concept of a protected, carefree childhood. Yes, very small children were doted on, but once you could walk, talk, and carry a bucket, you were put to work. And the work never ends. Boys might help in the fields, tend livestock, or learn a trade. Girls were trained in domestic tasks, spinning, milking, cooking, weaving, and helping their mothers raise younger siblings, sometimes infants not much younger than themselves. It's not uncommon to see a 7-year-old with a toddler on her hip and a look of eternal resignation in her eyes. The church, as always, had opinions. It believed children were born with original sin, and that proper discipline was needed to shape them into good Christians. That meant early indoctrination. Your village priest probably made sure you knew your prayers by heart. Couldn't memorize them? Well, there's always a sharp whack from a birch rod to help jog the memory. You want a quirky tidbit? In some regions, children played with toys made from dried pigs' bladders. Inflated and tied off, they were used like primitive balloons, or worse, medieval soccer balls. Imagine gleefully kicking around the internal organ of your dinner. Childhood magic. But don't worry. You might also have a spinning top carved from wood or a doll made of straw. Occasionally, a festival day brings games, tug-of-war, tag, or something involving dangerously sharp sticks and uncomfortably large rocks. Laughter still happens. Play still bursts through the cracks like sunlight. But it's rare, brief, and always done with one eye on the adults, because someone will shout at you to do something productive. If your family's especially poor, and let's face it, they probably are, you might be sent away. At 7 or 8, it's common to be fostered out to another household as a servant, apprentice, or page. You pack your single set of clothes, say goodbye, and walk to a new village where you'll sleep on straw in someone else's barn and call someone else master. It's scary, sure, but it's also a chance to learn a trade if you survive long enough. Historians still debate the nature of these arrangements. Were they exploitative child labor or early forms of vocational training? Maybe both. Maybe it depended on whether your new lord was kind, cruel, or just deeply indifferent. Let's say you're apprenticed to a blacksmith. That sounds noble, right? You imagine crafting swords, shaping glowing iron, commanding fire. What you actually do is carry coal, scrub floors, and get scolded by accident twice a week. You learn by watching, then by doing. You're not paid, not in coin, anyway, but your family might receive food or a piglet in exchange. Not bad, all things considered. And girls? Their options are narrower. Domestic service. Midwifery training. Possibly spinning in a workshop where the air is thick with dust and the owner doesn't believe in windows. If they're lucky, they're taught how to read enough to manage a household or keep church calendars. If not, they're told to smile, scrub, and bear it. Puberty creeps in early. Malnutrition and hard labor mess with your body's schedule, but nature still barrels forward. By 12, you're betrothed. By 13, married. By 14, you could be holding your first child. No one's going to ask if you're ready. In short, your childhood isn't just over, it never really got a fair shot. You learn to be quiet. You learn to stay out of the Reeves way. You learn how to stitch a wound with thread stolen from your mother's basket and how to hide from the neighbor's drunk uncle when he stumbles home angry. You learn where the soft dirt is best for digging and burying your grief. Still, sometimes, just sometimes, there's a moment. You and your friend sneak away to the edge of the forest and float bits of bark down a stream, pretending they're ships. You catch a frog and name it Sir Hopsalot. You hum a tune you heard at the last midsummer feast and forget, for 5 whole minutes, that your hands are raw and your back already hurts. And then someone calls your name. There's grain to thresh, water to haul, goats to chase. The moment's over. Because you're 7. And you have work to do. You're woken up before dawn by the church bell tolling through the morning mist. Not a melodic chime or a gentle call to rise, this is a deep, bone-vibrating clang that says, God is awake. Why aren't you? You groan, roll over on your scratchy straw mat, and briefly wish for a religion that values sleeping in. Too bad. Because in the Middle Ages, the church isn't just a part of your life, it is your life. From the moment you're born, baptized within a week, lest your soul get ideas, to the second you die, ideally with a priest nearby to whisper a quick absolution, you are soaked in doctrine. The church doesn't just influence your morality, it owns your calendar, your money, your education, if you get any, and your most private behaviors. including, yes, what you do under the blankets, or straw, or whatever passes for intimacy in a one-room house shared with 7 family members and a goat. It starts early. You cross yourself before meals. You attend Mass every Sunday, no exceptions. Even if you're sick. Even if it's raining. Even if your legs are frozen solid from hauling wood all week. Miss church, and people talk. Miss it twice, and the priest talks. Miss it 3 times, and suddenly you are suspected of consorting with the devil, or worse, questioning authority. The church calendar rules your year. It's not January to December, it's Advent to All Souls, punctuated by saints' days, holy fasts, and feast days. You feast when you're told, fast when you're ordered, and confess more than a guilty politician under interrogation. During Lent, you might live on peas and beer and pretend it's spiritually enriching. On feast days, you get to eat cheese and dance without shame. Temporarily. But don't let that fool you. Every moment of joy is wrapped in layers of guilt. Celebrate too much? Sin. Miss a confession? Sin. Think an inappropriate thought about the brewer's daughter while kneeling at the altar? That's 2 sins and possibly a bad omen for the next harvest. One of the more infamous aspects of medieval Christianity was its obsession with regulating sex. The Church published penitential guides, basically sin catalogues, that described, in painstaking and rather eyebrow-raising detail, every possible impure act. The punishment varied depending on how imaginative you got. Some acts meant a week of fasting. Others required public penance or extended prayer. And don't even think about touching yourself. That's considered a solo road to hell with no stops along the way. Quirky tidbit, there were actual rules about what days of the week you could have marital relations. Friday? Off limits. Sunday? Definitely not. Feast days? No. Fasting days? Absolutely not. Advent and Lent? For the love of everything holy, please don't. That left you with, maybe, Tuesdays in late April, assuming you hadn't eaten garlic and were feeling sufficiently penitent. The priest, meanwhile, is omnipresent. He's not just your religious leader. He's the record keeper, the moral compass, the tax collector for tithes, and occasionally the guy who drinks too much sacramental wine and falls asleep during Vespers. He might be kind, or terrifying, or suspiciously invested in gossip. But he holds your spiritual leash. Confession is where it gets personal. You kneel in a cold stone room and whisper your darkest thoughts through a wooden grate, hoping the priest doesn't recognize your voice. You tell him about the loaf you stole, the lie you told, the time you accidentally had a feeling. He assigns your penance. Say 10 prayers. Fast a day. Avoid that feeling next time. And speaking of lies, heresy is not just a theological difference of opinion. It's a crime. If you start suggesting that maybe the church shouldn't be charging fees to forgive sins, or maybe saints don't literally cry blood, you could be branded a heretic. And that, dear listener, could land you in serious trouble. Like excommunication, public flogging, or a quiet disappearance into someone's damp stone basement. Still, despite the fear and control, the church does offer something the rest of medieval life often lacks: structure. Community. A moral framework, however rigid. There's comfort in the rhythm of the hours, matins, lauds, vespers. In the rituals, candles flickering against stone walls, incense curling in the air, Latin hymns echoing off wooden rafters. Even if you don't understand the words, you understand the feeling. You belong. You are small, but you are seen. And let's not forget, religion explains everything. Why the crops failed. God's judgment. Why the river flooded. Divine wrath. Why your neighbor's cow gave birth to a two-headed calf. Witchcraft, or maybe a metaphor. Either way, the church has an answer. Always. But sometimes you wonder. When the priest says that your suffering is holy, do you believe him? When he tells you that your hunger pleases the Lord, does it feel true? When he warns against dancing too freely, smiling too broadly, or loving too deeply, do you nod, or do you feel a spark of something that might be rebellion? Careful. That's a dangerous thought. Because in the Middle Ages, the church isn't just a building. It's the walls around your mind. You spill a bucket of milk on the barn floor. The cow kicks you square in the thigh. You mutter something under your breath, and just like that, congratulations. You might be cursed. In the medieval world, nothing is just a coincidence. Bad luck isn't bad luck. It's a sign. A punishment. A curse. Or maybe that old woman who lives on the edge of the woods gave you the evil eye. Either way, superstition isn't some occasional mental detour, it's your operating system. Your day is shaped by invisible rules. Don't sweep after sunset. Don't cross paths with a hare. Don't step on a crack, well, not quite, but close. You knock on wood, throw salt over your shoulder, if you can afford it, and carry an iron nail in your pocket just in case the spirits are feeling frisky. You don't question it. No one does. That's just how things are. Superstition fills the gaps between what people observe and what they can't explain. Why did your cousin's baby die in its sleep? Why did lightning strike the barn and not the forge? Why did the bread rise too quickly last week? The answer isn't physics or yeast temperatures. It's the will of the gods, the saints, or something much darker that lives beyond the trees. Your village has its own brand of folklore, passed down in whispers and fireside warnings. There's the well where wishes work, but only if whispered on a full moon. The tree that weeps sap every May Day and must never be cut. And that rock down by the stream? Never touch it. Once, a man sat on it and his cow dropped dead the next morning. Coincidence? Absolutely not. And this isn't fringe behavior, it's woven into the rhythm of life. When you plant your crops, you check the moon. When you bake, you say a prayer to Saint Honoré, patron of bakers. When your back hurts, someone ties a dried bat to your belt and tells you it'll clear up by next Tuesday. You believe them. Why wouldn't you? It worked for their cousin. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were purely cultural or deeply religious. Did people believe in spirits alongside saints? Or were saints just local spirits rebranded? One thing's for sure, superstition and faith weren't enemies. They were neighbors. Possibly roommates. And neither appreciated skepticism. The church, of course, frowns on this. Officially. It warns against charms, amulets, fortune-telling. But unofficially? Many priests mutter protective prayers while sprinkling holy water that's been quietly mixed with salt and herbs. They warn against witchcraft while giving quiet nods to the midwife's odd little bundles of twine and feathers. Everyone's playing both sides, just to be safe. You remember that time your father got a fever and the local healer tied a piece of dried toadskin around his neck? The priest said a prayer over it, just to bless the method. Your father recovered. Was it the herbs? The toad? Divine intervention? Who knows? But no one questions the toad's involvement again. And speaking of toads, witchcraft is never far from people's minds. That strange woman who talks to birds and lives alone? Definitely suspicious. The shepherd whose sheep never get sick probably made a deal with something unholy. You tread carefully. You don't want to draw attention, because being accused of witchcraft means trouble. Real trouble. Quirky but real. In some areas, people believed witches could steal your sleep, ride you like a horse in the night, leaving you exhausted and sore. To prevent this, you might sleep with a knife under your bed or sprinkle ashes across the threshold to see if footprints appear by morning. If they do, you have a problem. But it's not just the dark arts that rule your habits. Even positive traditions are steeped in the supernatural. A new baby is immediately blessed or marked with soot to ward off spirits. You never, ever compliment someone's child without also spitting, or at least pretending to. Otherwise, the evil eye might strike. Best to be safe and just act mildly rude to every baby you meet. Your farm tools are blessed. Your door is chalked with holy symbols in January. Your dreams are interpreted. If you dream of teeth falling out, someone will die. If you dream of fire, someone will marry. And if you dream of pigs, best not to tell anyone. That one's personal. Everything has meaning. A bird tapping on your window. A candle that flickers out mid-prayer. A loaf that doesn't rise. These aren't random, they're omens. And while some people shrug them off, most keep them tucked in the back of their minds like a pocket talisman. Just in case. The rituals, the stories, the whispered warnings, they are not silly, not to you. They are how you try to stay safe in a world where safety is an illusion. Where plague, fire, bad harvests, and angry lords could destroy everything you love by the time the next rooster crows. If believing in invisible forces gives you a sense of control, even a threadbare one, then that's enough. And deep down, maybe a part of you really has seen something. A glimmer in the woods. A cold breeze with no wind. A voice when you were alone. You don't talk about it, but you remember it. And when you pass that tree near the stream, the one no one touches, you quicken your pace. Just a little. Because you believe. Or at least you don't not believe. And in the Middle Ages, that's the same thing. You want to visit your cousin. She lives just 2 villages over, barely a dozen miles. In modern life, you'd hop in a car, throw on a podcast, and be there in 20 minutes. In medieval times? Strap in. This is going to be an all-day, leg-numbing, possibly life-threatening adventure. Travel isn't simple. It's not casual. And it's definitely not safe. First, you need permission. Remember feudalism? You can't just leave your village like it's no big deal. You're tied to the land, and moving around without your lord's blessing is frowned upon, sometimes punishable. So you go to the manor, cap in hand, and ask. The steward sighs, tells you to bring back a jug of ale from that one brewer your lord likes, and grudgingly waves you off. You leave before dawn, pouch of barley bread at your hip, a walking stick in hand. No paved roads. No signage. Just muddy tracks rutted with cart wheels and scattered with puddles that smell like cow. You're lucky if the path hasn't been washed out by last week's rain. One wrong turn, and you're not late, you're lost. Entirely. Where am I? Lost. Will I be eaten by wolves? Lost. Because yes, wild animals are a real concern. You've heard the stories, wolves circling travelers at dusk, boars that charge without warning, even bears in the darker, deeper woods. Are they exaggerated? Maybe. But you're not about to find out the hard way. And then there are the people. Bandits love travelers. Especially solo ones. You carry no money, but you've got boots, bread, and your dignity, all of which are up for grabs. Highwaymen might not kill you, but they'll happily rough you up, strip you down, and leave you in a ditch wearing nothing but confusion and regrets. There's no police force, no patrols. If you're lucky, a caravan of merchants or a few pilgrims are heading the same way. Safety in numbers. Otherwise, you keep your head down, your pace brisk, and your stick ready. You avoid eye contact. You don't talk to strangers. And you absolutely don't stop for a game of dice on the roadside. That's not a friendly invitation, it's bait. Quirky medieval tip. Some travelers carried safe conduct tokens, little badges or documents issued by local lords or religious institutions. These showed you were on official business or a pilgrimage. They didn't guarantee safety, but they might buy you a second of hesitation before someone robs you blind. Along the way, you might pass a wayside shrine. A simple wooden cross, a candle stub, maybe a handful of flowers. You stop, mumble a quick prayer for safety, and keep moving. Superstition and religion blend seamlessly on the road. You whisper blessings to St. Christopher, patron saint of travelers, and hope he's listening. You'd send a pigeon ahead with a note if you could afford a pigeon. Or write. Or paper. When the weather turns, and it always does, the road becomes a pit of slippery, shoe-stealing muck. Your legs are tired. Your back aches. And that barley bread? You finished it 2 hours ago. You chew a pine needle just to keep your mouth busy. At some point, your foot catches on a root, and you hit the ground hard. A rock digs into your palm. You curse under your breath, not too loud, in case a spirit or bandit is within earshot. You sit up slowly, checking that nothing's broken. Except maybe your dignity, which you left back near the puddle that ate your shoe. As night begins to creep across the sky, you panic a little. You're not there yet. And traveling after dark is a terrible idea. No lamps. No guideposts. No visibility. Just shadows, and whispers, and creatures whose eyes reflect torchlight in deeply upsetting ways. If you're lucky, you find shelter. A roadside inn, if such a luxury exists nearby. But inns aren't like the cheery taverns from storybooks. They're crowded, filthy, and filled with travelers of dubious character. The floor is covered in straw, alive with lice, the food is stale, and the sleeping arrangements are communal. You sleep on a bench, or the floor, or in a chair if no one fights you for it. And pay? You pay in whatever you have. A boot repair. A song. Half a chicken. If you can't pay, you might be cleaning chamber pots before sunrise or, if the innkeeper's generous, scrubbing the tables with a handful of spit and shame. Historians still argue how much medieval travel occurred outside religious pilgrimages and official business. Many peasants lived and died within a few miles of their birthplace. For most, going far meant the next parish over. Journeys of 50 miles or more were the stuff of ballads, often retold with increasing exaggeration and decreasing accuracy. But let's say, against all odds, you make it. You trudge into your cousin's village just as dusk settles. She sees you and gasps. You look like you've wrestled a swamp and lost. You stink of mud, fear, and faintly of goat. Your arms are scratched. Your bread's gone. But you're there. She gives you a weak beer, a place by the hearth, and a bowl of stew that tastes like heaven. You fall asleep mid-chew, boots still on, heart still racing. And the next day? You get to do it all again. Only this time, in reverse. You wake up in the same spot you've always woken up, in a small, drafty cottage next to the same patch of turnips you've always known. And as your eyes adjust to the morning light and you swing your legs over the side of your straw mattress, the same reality greets you again, you're a serf. And unless the world turns upside down or you spontaneously become royalty, you always will be. The Middle Ages aren't big on upward mobility. In fact, the whole system is designed to keep you exactly where you are. Born a serf? Then you'll live a serf, marry a serf, raise serf children, and die a serf, ideally in the same field where you once learned to walk. It's not just tradition, it's law. Serfdom isn't slavery, exactly, but it's close enough to make little difference in your daily life. You're legally tied to the land, and by extension, to the lord who owns it. You can't leave without permission. You can't sell your land. You can't choose to work for someone else. You owe your lord labor, rent, in grain, eggs, livestock, and unwavering loyalty. In return, you get protection, which usually means he promises not to personally set your cottage on fire. Your freedom is theoretical. On paper, maybe you could buy it. In some cases, if you somehow came into money or performed extraordinary service, your lord might grant you manumission, a formal release. But let's be honest, where would you even get the money? You've been paid in onions and back pain for most of your life. You work the same plot your father worked. And his father. And his father's father, going back generations. The land owns you as much as you own it. And even if your crops fail, you still owe rent. If you can't pay, then you owe more labor. And if you can't work, well, that's your family's problem now. Historians still argue whether serfdom was universally miserable or just mostly miserable. Some argue that, depending on your location and your lord's temperament, life as a serf could be livable. You had a place to stay, land to farm, and a community to depend on. Others point out that the total lack of freedom, chronic poverty, and crushing obligations made it more prison than paradise. And even when you dream of escape, of freedom, of starting over, reality snaps back like a taut bowstring. Where would you go? Cities might offer better wages and a chance at independence, but reaching them requires leaving your manor illegally. If you're caught, you'll be dragged back and punished. If you make it and somehow blend in for a year and a day, then, and only then, you could be declared a free man or woman. But let's say you get caught after 6 months. The penalty? Varies. Maybe your lord fines you. Maybe he flogs you in front of the whole village. Maybe he just keeps a careful eye on you afterward, quietly reducing your access to communal tools, land, or favors. Either way, your reputation's shot. People whisper. The reeve watches. And you carry the invisible weight of untrustworthy on your back like another bushel of hay. A quirky but real detail, in some areas, serfs were required to give the lord their best animal when they died. It was called a hariot, essentially a "thanks for letting me exist" tax, paid posthumously. Even in death, the manor took its cut. And marriage? Not entirely up to you. You often need your lord's permission to marry someone from another village. Why? Because if you marry someone from another manor and move away, your lord loses labor. You are, economically, legally, and socially, an asset. It's not just your labor that belongs to the system, it's your entire body. Your back bends for the plow, your hands blister on the scythe, your knees ache from kneeling in the dirt. And still, you're expected to show up every day. Rain or shine. Hunger or sickness. You are not a person with choices. You are a cog in the machine. And heaven forbid you complain. Questioning your position can be seen as insubordination. That reeve who keeps the manor's records? He also keeps track of troublemakers. Your name could end up on his mental list. One wrong word, and suddenly you're being assigned the worst fields or the most exhausting jobs. You learn to smile through your teeth and nod at the right times. Still, you do dream. Maybe late at night, when the fire burns low and your family is asleep, you whisper stories to your children about towns where people own their own shops, bake their own bread, and speak their minds without fear. Towns where no one bows just because someone else wears silk. Your children listen with wide eyes, and for a moment, the weight of your reality lifts. But morning always comes. And with it, the same mud-caked boots. The same aching legs. The same Lord looking down from his manor like you're just another sheep in the pasture. Some days, you imagine running. Just walking into the woods and not stopping. But the forest is dangerous, full of wolves and worse. You don't know the roads. You don't know who to trust. And you don't have a coin to your name. So you stay. Because that's what serfs do. They stay. They survive. And they hope that maybe, just maybe, their grandchildren won't have to. You sit on a cold rock, staring at a horizon that never changes, thinking, I'm so bored I could die. Which, in the Middle Ages, is both a passing thought and a legitimate concern. Because boredom isn't just a mild inconvenience here, it's a full-blown psychological battleground. And unlike today, there's no internet to scroll, no shows to binge, no fidget spinner to twirl while you pretend to listen to a sermon. What do you do when there's nothing to do? You work. Then you rest. Then you work again. Then maybe, you walk to a neighboring cottage and sit silently with someone who's just as exhausted as you. That's your entertainment. Shared misery and stale bread. There are no hobbies as you know them. You don't collect things. You don't paint for pleasure. You don't knit because it's relaxing, you knit because your family is cold and threadbare. You don't read because you can't. And even if you could, books are so expensive you'd have to trade your entire extended family just to rent one for a week. So you do what you're told, you go to church. You plant crops. You mend clothes. You stir the stew. You sweep. You sleep. And you try not to think too hard about the dull ache of sameness pressing down on you every hour of every day. And then, sometimes, something weird happens. Like a dancing plague. No, that's not a metaphor. Actual dancing plagues occurred. Most famously in 1518 in Strasbourg, when dozens of people began dancing uncontrollably for days, some reportedly until they collapsed or died. Historians still debate whether it was mass hysteria, ergot poisoning, or some kind of stress-induced psychological episode. But one thing is clear, life was so monotonous, so psychologically brutal, that people occasionally snapped in synchronized rhythm. You might not be dancing until your knees give out, but you feel it. That creeping sense of is this it? You're 24, you've lived the same day for 8 years, and the most exciting thing you've seen this week is a pig giving birth to twins. That was huge. Festivals break the cycle a little. May Day, Midsummer, Harvest Feast, Saints' Days, they're all bright spots in a grey calendar. You drink. You dance, voluntarily, this time. You wear flowers and try not to think about the fact that tomorrow you'll be ankle-deep in sheep muck again. But even those festivals are rooted in necessity. They're not about indulgence. They're about marking time. Giving your mind a reason to hang on until the next candlelit evening where someone plays a pipe and everyone pretends they don't hate their job. You might also gather at the tavern. It's loud, cramped, smelly, and half the people there are already drunk on cheap ale. But it's still somewhere to be. You listen to a traveling minstrel tell the same 3 stories he told last year. You laugh because you've forgotten the ending. Or maybe you're just desperate to feel anything. Quirky tidbit? Medieval people did have games. Board games like Nine Men's Morris, dice games, and rough field sports that were less organized competition and more village-wide brawls with a ball somewhere in the mix. Early football was basically a mob pushing a pig bladder around a muddy street while trying not to lose teeth. It was violent. It was chaotic. And it was fun because it broke the monotony. For children, play was mostly mimicry of adult life. Little girls pretended to cook. Boys carved toy plows or played with knuckle bones, animal ankle bones used like dice. It's not much, but it's something. Still, childhood ends early. You grow up fast when survival is a full-time job. By 10, you're working. By 12, you're betrothed. By 14, you've lived through 2 famines and a fire. Speaking of famine, that's boredom's cruel cousin. At least when you're busy starving, you have something to think about. When harvests fail or supply lines are cut, the hunger creeps in like fog. Meals become rituals of scarcity. Bread made from bark, soup stretched with grass, old salted meat that smells like bad decisions. You go to sleep thinking about food. You wake up doing the same. You'd trade your soul for a boiled onion. And yet, life doesn't stop. You still work. Still worship. Still smile when someone mentions how beautiful the spring lambs are this year, even as your stomach growls like a cursed drum. Sometimes, boredom turns inward. You feel it gnawing at your mind. No choices. No variety. No autonomy. Just the same chores, the same faces, the same view from your cottage window. A life measured in sunrises and the echo of church bells. You might not even realize you're bored. There's no word for it. The concept of boredom as we understand it doesn't emerge until much later. But the feeling? That's timeless. That hollow, drifting fog that makes your thoughts go quiet. And yet, somehow, people carry on. You learn to find wonder in tiny things. The way a candle flickers. The sound of rain on thatch. A bird call you've never heard before. You make up songs. You name your tools. You talk to your cow like she's a therapist with hooves. Because in a world without color or change or outlets, imagination is your only rebellion. You dream of stories you've only half heard. Of cities you'll never visit. Of people who speak languages you don't even know exist. You dream, just enough. And then it's morning again. The same sun. The same path. But maybe today, the pig will give birth to triplets. One can hope. You catch a glimpse of silk. Not on a tapestry. Not in a dream. But on a person. A real, living, heavily perfumed noble riding past on a snow-colored horse, her gown trailing like a comet. She doesn't look at you. Why would she? You're just another peasant standing in mud. But for a split second, you wonder what it's like to live that life. To wear silk instead of burlap. To dine on peacocks instead of porridge. Then she's gone, and you remember, being rich in the Middle Ages doesn't necessarily mean being happy. Or kind. Or even remotely sane. The nobility live in castles, or something castle-adjacent. Think fortified manor houses, drafty stone halls, and maybe a moat if they're feeling fancy. Their furniture is better. Their boots are better. Their food is better. But the people themselves? Well, not always. See, wealth in medieval society doesn't come with an instruction manual. There's no concept of noblesse oblige, at least not in practice. Your local lord might be generous and fair, or he might throw chickens at his servants and accuse clouds of witchcraft. You get what you get. The system is designed to keep them powerful and everyone else subservient. Nobles don't work, work is for you. They fight, command, collect taxes, and complain about things being too heavy. Their children are raised by wet nurses and tutors. Their sons are trained to be knights. Their daughters are traded like rare pottery to form alliances and secure land. Everyone is an asset or a liability. Love? Optional. You might think nobles are clean, refined, elegant. And yes, they own combs. And mirrors. And bathtubs that occasionally get used. But don't let the embroidery fool you. Bathing is still rare. Lice are still common. And perfume doesn't hide the fact that under all that velvet, they sweat like everyone else. Sometimes more. Those furs? They cook under the sun. A noble feast, however, is a sight. Roasted swan. Elaborately mulled jellies. Dishes with gold leaf, yes, actual gold. They drink wine out of goblets while a jester juggles 3 apples and a serious head injury. You watch from the edges, possibly as a servant, possibly as someone peering through a crack in the door. It's mesmerizing. And also absurd. They eat meat daily while you can barely afford broth. They wipe their mouths with embroidered linen while you use your sleeve. They sneer at your mud-stained tunic, forgetting that they'd starve in a week if you stopped growing their wheat. But don't envy them too much. Because with all that wealth comes one enormous burden, paranoia. Noble life is a non-stop Game of Thrones. Schemes. Plots. Betrayals. You think you've got problems? Try navigating a family where everyone's cousin wants your land. Or where a dinner invitation could be a poisoned goodbye. They marry for power, not affection. They keep friends close and knives closer. And if they fall out of favor with the king? It's off with their head, or worse, their title. Historians still argue whether most nobles were tyrants or simply products of their brutal time. Many probably tried to be just rulers. But when you grow up being told you're God's chosen landlord, you tend to develop certain personality quirks. Like threatening serfs for sport. Or deciding to go on crusade because your astrologer said the stars were favorable. Speaking of, there's a weird overlap of education and superstition among the upper class. Nobles dabble in astronomy, alchemy, medical theory, and yet still believe in cursed bloodlines, lunar madness, and that headaches can be cured by rubbing a toad on your temples. One countess reportedly paid a monk to exorcise her favorite horse. Did it work? The horse still kicked everyone, so probably not. And let's not forget that noble children aren't exactly cuddled into empathy. Boys are sent off at 7 to serve as pages, then squires, then knights. They're taught obedience, swordplay, and politics. Not compassion. Girls, meanwhile, are schooled in embroidery, court manners, and obedience. If they're lucky, they learn to read. But only religious texts. Wouldn't want too much thinking to happen. You remember once seeing the Baron's son smack a servant for bowing too slowly. No one said a word. No one could. Because that's the hierarchy, a ladder you weren't even born onto, much less allowed to climb. You're not seen as a full person. You're a backdrop. A necessary prop in their ongoing performance of divine superiority. And still, you can't help but wonder, just a little, what it might be like to sleep on a feather mattress, to own a spoon made of pewter, to have shoes for every season. It's tempting. All that polish. All that luxury. Until you remember how many of them go mad. Or die violently. Or spend their lives terrified of rumors and rebellions. Because when you live at the top, the fall is far. And sometimes, it's fast. So you turn back to your cottage. Your stew. Your evening by the hearth with your family and your splintery bench. It's not glamorous. It's not cushioned. But at least no one's trying to poison your wine. It starts with smoke on the horizon. You squint, shading your eyes with one hand, and feel your stomach twist. That's not chimney smoke. That's burning roof smoke. And where there's smoke in the Middle Ages, there's war or something very close to it. Here's the thing about war back then, it's not far away. It's not something you read about in a headline or watch on a distant screen. War lives nearby. It eats at the same tavern. It sleeps in your lord's hall. It shows up uninvited and brings friends. Sometimes it's official, an invasion, a border skirmish, a royal disagreement that spills into villages like yours. Other times, it's more casual. A feud between local lords. A knight settling a personal vendetta. Or a band of mercenaries with no employer and too much free time. Whatever the cause, the result is the same: panic. The church bell tolls erratically. That's the alarm. Clang, pause, clang, clang, pause, clang. You hear it and instantly drop your bundle of firewood. In the distance, others do the same. People start running, gathering children, dragging livestock toward the woods. You grab your sister's hand and start sprinting. No one tells you what's happening, because no one knows. You hear rumors, French raiders, outlaw bands, maybe even your own lord soldiers coming back from a failed campaign and taking payment in loot. You don't stick around to find out. You've heard stories. They don't just fight the enemy. They burn fields. They smash beehives for honey. They kill livestock and take what they want. And if they find people still at home? Let's just say it won't end in polite conversation. Historians still argue whether most medieval wars directly affected common people or only disrupted them indirectly. But here's a truth rarely told: when knights fight, peasants bleed. You're not on anyone's side. You're just in the way. You make it to the edge of the forest and hide beneath thick brush. Your breath comes in short gasps. Behind you, the thatched rooftops are a memory. Shouting echoes through the valley. Somewhere, a dog barks, and then silence. You wait. Hours, maybe. Eventually you sneak back, careful not to be seen. Your village hasn't been destroyed, not entirely, but it's been touched. A cottage collapsed. Someone's barn has been stripped. The baker's flour sacks are gone. The bell rope is frayed and hanging limp, like it gave up. Your neighbor's son is missing. You go to your cottage. It's been ransacked. Your father's knife is gone. Your mother's pot is overturned. The door has been kicked in. You feel violated, but also lucky. Some families lost everything. Some are gone. Later, a messenger arrives. He's young, out of breath, and carrying a rolled-up parchment with a wax seal. Your lord wants you to know there's a conflict. He might need men. Strong ones. Loyal ones. Translation: you're being drafted. You're handed a spear you barely know how to use, a padded tunic that smells like every bad decision ever made, and a pair of shoes one size too large. You march with the rest of the village's unlucky sons. Some cry. Most just stare ahead, numb. There's no training. No strategy. Just a vague direction and the hope that the guy next to you doesn't trip and impale himself. You're not even sure who you're fighting. War in the Middle Ages is rarely glamorous. It's not tournaments or shining armor. It's mud. Noise. Fire. The clash of metal and the smell of fear. You might never see the enemy clearly. Just shadows in smoke. You swing, you duck, you scream, and then maybe you go home. If you're lucky. Quirky tidbit? Archers in some English armies were required to practice every Sunday after church. If you were a good shot, you were valuable. If you weren't, well, you were still holding a pointy stick, so that's something. Crossbows were banned by the church for being too deadly, which tells you how effective they were, and how worried knights were about peasants learning to use them. You survive your brief tour. You come home with a cut on your arm and a 1,000-yard stare. No one celebrates. There are no parades. You're told to report back to the fields in the morning. War doesn't excuse you from the harvest. You get back to work. You rebuild the shed. Patch the thatch. Count your chickens. Someone says the king won. Someone else says the king died. You stop listening. It doesn't matter. You weren't fighting for a crown. You were fighting to stay alive. And even when things are peaceful, the fear lingers. A new lord might take over. A tax collector might arrive. A crusade might be declared. You live one decree away from being swept up again. That sword your neighbor buried in the woods? He keeps its location memorized, just in case. And so do you. Because war is never far. It's a neighbor with bad habits. It crashes at your door, eats your food, takes your family, and leaves you worse off than before. But you're still here. You sharpen your hoe. And you wait for the next fire. You're hungry again, no surprise there, but this time, something worse dawns on you. Your neighbor's dog just had better dinner than you. It's gnawing happily on a chunk of roast meat, tail thumping against the dirt, while you sip the same watery cabbage broth for the third meal in a row. You glance into your bowl, then back at the slobbering mutt, and it hits you, in the grand medieval food chain, you are barely keeping ahead of the livestock. Animals, especially those owned by nobles, live better than you. Your lord's horse? It has a name, a dedicated groom, a soft blanket, and oats imported from somewhere with sunshine. You? You share a bed with your siblings, wear shoes made from the unlucky parts of cows, and haven't seen imported anything, ever. That falcon chained near the castle gate eats more meat in a week than you do in a season. The hunting dogs? Let's talk about the dogs. They have kennels built sturdier than your entire cottage. They're brushed, exercised, fed rich scraps from noble kitchens, and trained with a level of attention you only wish your village priest gave your soul. They snarl at you if you get too close, and the worst part is, they are right to. They outrank you in every possible way. You work for a lord who loves the hunt. It's the ultimate noble pastime, less about food and more about power. He rides into the forest on his finest horse, horn in hand, surrounded by a small army of dogs and well-dressed guests. They trample wildflowers and shout across the trees, chasing deer or boar or whatever they've decided must die for sport today. Sometimes they leave the carcass behind, because it's not about the meat. It's about the thrill. You, meanwhile, once got fined for catching a rabbit on your own land. Poaching is a serious crime. The forests are protected. The animals belong to your lord. So do the mushrooms, technically. Even the trees are off limits unless you have permission to gather firewood, and only the deadfall kind, not the good stuff. Cut down a living tree without asking, and suddenly you're the village outlaw. Over a log. Historians still argue how strictly these rules were enforced. Some lords were lenient. Others made examples of even minor offenses, branding poachers, cutting off fingers, or throwing entire families off the land. You remember hearing about a boy 2 villages over who was caught with a pheasant. His family never saw him again. Meanwhile, up at the manor, the lord's hounds bark joyfully as they're served leftovers from a feast: pork bones, roasted goose, oily bread, even the occasional sweetmeat. You smell it on the wind. It's cruel. Back at your hovel, the cat eats mice. You eye the cat. The cat eyes you. Mutual suspicion. And then there's the cows. Their lives aren't glamorous, but at least they're functional. They're valued. They give milk, drag plows, fertilize the fields. You've known a cow that got a better burial than your cousin, complete with a prayer and a dedicated plot behind the barn. One quirky tidbit? In some manors, prized hunting hounds were included in legal documents. Named. As if they were people. Not you. Not your family. But Sir Growlsworth of Barkington? He has a will. A will. And if you're ever injured or sick, don't expect a noble to send help. But if one of their horses goes lame? The vet arrives before sunset with a bag of salves, a tiny spoon, and the kind of concern you haven't felt since your mother used to brush your hair and hum lullabies. You try not to resent it. The animals don't know better. The dogs don't understand privilege. The falcon doesn't know you envy its private perch. But the humans? They know. They just don't care. To them, animals are valuable. Peasants are replaceable. You once heard the steward say, "Better to lose a man than a good mare." He said it after you spent 2 days digging out the Lord's carriage from a flooded road. Your back still hurts. Even your own animals get treated like royalty until they don't. You feed the pig better than yourself all year, because come winter, it's going to become sausage. It sleeps in your kitchen corner. You scratch behind its ears. Then you're told to slit its throat and turn it into winter stores. You do it because you must. And then you cry. There's a hierarchy here, and you've known it your whole life. The lord. The knight. The priest. The steward. The merchant. The falcon. The hound. The cow. You. So you finish your broth. You pat the cat on the head. You scrape together a few crumbs for tomorrow. And you try not to think too hard about the fact that, if reincarnation is real, your best-case scenario might be coming back as a particularly handsome spaniel. You wake up to your breath, literally. It's hanging in the air like a ghost, drifting upward from your mouth in pale ribbons. Your fingers are too stiff to rub together, and your toes have staged a quiet rebellion inside your worn leather shoes. It's winter in the Middle Ages, and nature has absolutely no intention of going easy on you. Cold is not a season here. It's a siege. A drawn-out, bone-deep war waged by wind, ice, and the utter indifference of medieval architecture. Your house has no insulation. The walls are wattle and daub, a polite term for sticks and mud with delusions of grandeur. The thatched roof leaks. The draft comes through cracks that were never sealed. And the only heat source? A tiny hearth that wheezes out warmth with all the enthusiasm of a dying candle. You build a fire, but it takes effort. The wood is damp. The smoke clings to your clothes, your hair, your soul. Your eyes sting. Your lungs wheeze. But it's the only way to keep the frost from crawling under your skin and setting up permanent residence. There's no central heating. No electric blanket. No pile of cozy fleece throws. You sleep under whatever blankets or furs your family owns, often all in the same bed, sardine style, chasing each other's body heat like it's the Holy Grail. It kind of works. Until someone sneezes. Then you're just cold and sick. Food becomes a memory game. What did you store? Where is it buried? Did it freeze? You eat dried beans, onions, pickled cabbage, turnips that taste like old sadness. The salted pork is gone. The smoked fish is, let's just say, questionable. You pray the grain lasts until spring. Winter is also a medical hazard. You slip on ice while fetching water, twist your ankle, and suddenly your productivity is gone. You're not resting. You're falling behind. You can't afford to. No one can. Everyone has chores. Even the chickens look tense. One quirky and bleak tidbit. In some villages, people left their dead outside overnight because the ground was too frozen to dig a grave. Come morning, the body might be stiffer than the shovel. It's grim, but practical. And bathing? Forget it. Winter baths are rare even in summer, but now? Not unless you enjoy hypothermia as a personality trait. You scrape dirt off with a knife, wash your hands in icy water, and call it a day. You smell like smoke, sweat, and the very concept of effort. Your clothes? The same as always, wool, wool, and more wool. Layered and scratchy. You might have a cloak if you're lucky. Mittens? Unlikely. Boots? You've sewn patches onto patches until you're basically walking on fabric origami. You line them with straw and hope the frostbite holds off until at least Epiphany. Historians still argue whether medieval winters were actually harsher than today's, or whether it's the chronic malnutrition, poor housing, and zero medical care that made it feel that way. Either way, the suffering was real. You're not sipping cocoa by a fireplace. You're gnawing stale bread by a smoky hearth, hoping your chilblains don't turn into something that rhymes with amputation. Then there's your roof. You hear it before you see it, drip, drip, drip. The melting snow has found a hole. Again. You grab a bucket. Then another. You mutter something impolite under your breath and jam a rag into the gap. You already know it won't hold. The days are short. The nights are long. The sun sets before you finish your second chore. Candles are expensive. You rely on firelight, moonlight, and whatever luck you have stored in your bones. You fumble around in the dark. You stub your toe. You don't scream. Not because you're brave, but because your breath is too precious to waste on rage. You wrap your fingers around a warm mug of beer, not because you're trying to be festive, but because it's one of the only hot things in the house. Beer is safer than water, at least. And a little buzz numbs the fact that your spine feels like it's frozen to the chair. You think about summer. About sun-drenched fields and warm earth and fresh vegetables. You try not to cry. Tears freeze quickly in weather like this, and you really don't want to explain a frost-bitten eyelid to the healer. Your livestock suffers too. You pile straw in their pens. You huddle them close. If one dies, it's a disaster. If two die, it's a crisis. If more than that die, your family might not make it to spring. You talk to the animals now. Not just to comfort them, but because they don't ask you when the grain will run out. Sometimes, the cold brings silence. A kind of eerie calm. The snow muffles everything. Even the village dogs don't bark. You walk outside to empty a pot or fetch more wood, and the whole world feels paused. Still. Wrapped in white. For just a moment, it's beautiful. And then your fingers go numb. You run back inside, breathe on your hands, and whisper a quiet prayer to whichever saint is in charge of not freezing to death. There's probably one. There's a saint for toothaches, after all. Winter strips away the pretense. It doesn't care about class, ambition, or charm. It is merciless and thorough. Even the nobles shiver in their halls, wrapping themselves in furs and praying their servants didn't forget to stuff the windows with moss. You survive it, somehow. By routine. By layering. By never wasting warmth. And by telling yourself every morning, spring is coming. Spring is coming. Please, for the love of all things good and garlic, let spring come. Until then, you huddle. You endure. And you keep a bucket beneath that leak in the roof. Just in case. You're gone. Not dead, gone. As in, erased. As in, it's like you never existed at all. And that, more than anything else, is the haunting truth of medieval life. You are anonymous. You live in the margins, and when you're no longer breathing, even the margins let go of your name. Your story vanishes faster than ink in the rain. And no one is writing it down to begin with. There's no birth certificate. No social security number. No driver's license with a slightly awkward photo. When you're born, your name goes into one place, the parish record. And only if the priest remembered, had ink, and thought your family was important enough. Otherwise, you're just a baby that appeared and eventually learned how to dig turnips. You don't leave a digital footprint. You don't even leave a literal one unless it's in mud, and that washes away before sundown. In your time, people vanish constantly. They go out to gather herbs and never return. They walk into the woods and aren't seen again. They leave to find work and might as well have stepped off the edge of the earth. Word doesn't travel. No one checks in. There's no missing persons report, just whispered speculation and a slow shrug of collective memory. Sometimes the cause is clear. Bandits. Illness. War. Wolves. River crossings gone wrong. 1,000 ways to disappear, none of them dramatic enough for a ballad. No funeral. No grave marker. No portrait painted with solemn eye staring out through the centuries. Just a name spoken less and less until even your descendants mispronounce it or forget it entirely. And even if you do die at home, surrounded by the people who love you, your afterlife in memory is short. The graveyard is crowded. Plots are reused. Markers are wooden or small, and rock comes faster than reverence. That cross at the end of the row? It was your uncle's. Or maybe the cow that got sainted after surviving a lightning strike. Who knows? Quirky tidbit, some medieval graveyards placed rocks or heavy planks over fresh graves, not for reverence, but to stop wolves from digging up the remains. It's practical. It's macabre. And it doesn't exactly scream eternal rest. You don't have a will. You don't own much to pass on. Maybe a rusted knife, a patched cloak, and a basket with a good handle. If you're a woman, your estate might be recorded as 1 cooking pot and 3 hens. If you're a man, maybe you're remembered for owning a scythe that didn't break. Either way, it's not exactly the stuff of legends. And yet, you mattered. You sang to your child as they drifted off beside the fire. You made a joke at the market that made someone laugh so hard they dropped a turnip. You carved a symbol into a beam in your house, not because it was special, but because it was yours. A mark of presence. But the world doesn't keep those things. The next generation repurposes the house, plows the field, forgets the joke. Your life is repaved by time, season after season, like footsteps erased by snow. Historians still argue over how invisible medieval peasants truly were. Some say their stories are simply buried, hidden in manorial rolls, tax records, and church logs. Others insist that most lives were truly undocumented, except where labor or tithes were concerned. Either way, most of your moments will never be written down, retold, or remembered. You hear the story of a knight from your region, carved into a church wall. He fought in a battle you never heard of and died with honor. Meanwhile, your brother drowned in a canal trying to fix a broken wheelbarrow, and no one carved anything. Not even initials. Not even a date. And it's not just death that makes you disappear. It's life. You don't travel, don't publish, don't commission anything. You don't leave a legacy carved in stone, you leave behind a few grooves in a wooden spoon. Sometimes you daydream about being remembered. What it would be like to have a song sung about you. A little stained glass window showing your face. Maybe just a sentence in a monk's book, "Today, I met a man who made me laugh." But monks don't write about serfs. Unless you committed a sin. Or spontaneously combusted, which is admittedly rare. Even your dreams, your fears, your personality, they're undocumented. You had thoughts. You had favorites. Maybe you liked green apples more than red. Maybe you hummed the same tune every time it rained. Maybe you hated the feel of wool on your neck. All of it disappears. There's no diary. No letters. No drawings in the margins. No digital photo album. No cloud storage. No posts, no tags, no like if you remember this face. Just nothing. And yet, here you are. Breathing. Hurting. Loving. Laughing sometimes, even in the cold. You live your life as fully as you can, knowing that when you're gone, the only proof you existed might be the way your child holds a spoon exactly like you did. Or the strange, lopsided smile passed down like an heirloom. You won't be remembered. But right now, you are. And for a flicker of time, that's enough. You see a knight riding toward the village, and for a second, just a second, you feel it, awe. That polished armor. That glinting helmet. The plumed crest bobbing in the breeze. He looks like something from the tales. Like a walking statue. A holy warrior. A savior on horseback. Then he opens his mouth, yells at a child to get out of the way, and spits a thick wad of phlegm onto the road. Ah. There it is. Reality. You've grown up hearing about knights. They're the rock stars of the medieval world, bold, noble, chivalrous. Protectors of the weak, slayers of dragons, defenders of justice. But here's the quiet truth whispered in candlelit kitchens and behind closed shutters: most knights are jerks. Not all, of course. But the ones who swagger into your village usually bring more trouble than salvation. They're well-armed, well-fed, and very aware that they outrank you. To them, you're background noise, just another peasant to be stepped over or shouted at when their boots get muddy. You remember once seeing a knight ride his horse through the village bakery. Not around. Through. He wanted a shortcut. The bread? Flattened. The baker? Furious. The knight? Unbothered. He flicked a coin onto the counter like that solved everything and continued on his very important journey to wherever important knights go. Chivalry, as a concept, is still evolving. Historians still argue whether it was truly a code of ethical behavior or just a romanticized PR campaign. The original chivalric codes were more about loyalty to lords and military conduct than about being nice to peasants or opening doors. It wasn't until much later, that poets started adding all that rescue maidens and act with humility stuff. Most medieval knights didn't get the memo. And even those who do follow the code? They don't follow it for you. They might pray before a battle, respect noble opponents, or sing songs to distant ladies. But they're not likely to help you fix a fence or defend your farm from bandits. That's not what their armor's for. Speaking of that armor, yes, it looks cool. But it also makes them slow, hot, and frequently miserable. Knights aren't superheroes. They sweat like pigs, limp after battles, and need help getting on and off their horses. Squires assist them into their suits like medieval pit crews, and half the time, they're adjusting straps while the knight shouts about something itchy. Quirky tidbit? Some knights would stuff herbs into their helmets to mask the smell of their own heads after days in full gear. It helped, marginally. If you've ever smelled a sweaty sheepdog that's been left in a leather bag, you get the idea. You might think tournaments offer some wholesome excitement. And yes, they're public events. There's music, banners, crowds. But make no mistake, these are blood sports. Jousting isn't a friendly game. Knights die in the lists. Or they shatter their collarbones. Or they leave with a lance-shaped dent in their chest. You cheer from the sidelines, half horrified, half thrilled, while nobles bet on which cousin will be impaled first. Meanwhile, the rest of the village picks up the slack. While your lord and his entourage are busy hosting the local knights for honor and pageantry, you're fetching water, roasting meats, sweeping mud out of tents, and cleaning up after their horses. Because, surprise, pageantry takes a lot of peasant labor. And let's not even get started on the knight's attitude toward romance. You've heard the songs, brave knight pledges his heart to a fair maiden, fights a duel in her name, wins a rose and eternal devotion. Lovely stuff. Except most of that is fantasy, spun by bored court poets trying to impress patrons. In real life, knights marry for politics. Their romantic interests are often one-sided, enthusiastic, and not always consensual. You hear stories, maids summoned to private chambers, squires told to wait outside, and the heavy hush that follows. But you don't ask questions. Because who would you even ask? The law? The church? Sometimes, knights are called away to war, foreign crusades, border skirmishes, local rebellions. When they return, they're often harder, louder, less patient. Battle changes them. Not always for the better. And when you flinch as they pass, they don't notice. Or worse, they smile. Yet still, some of them try. You hear of one who paid to repair a burned village. Another who defended a widow's field from thieves. You cling to those stories. They're rare, but real. Little pockets of decency in a landscape of iron and arrogance. You see that same knight again a few weeks later. He's covered in mud this time, his horse limping, his visor bent. He mutters something under his breath and throws a coin at a boy for directions. You watch him disappear down the road, wondering if the bards will write a song about him. Probably. Will they mention the bakery incident? The barking orders? The indifference? Of course not. In the song, he'll be brave, glorious, a symbol of justice and grace. But you'll remember him for what he was, a man with a sword and a horse, raised to believe he mattered more than everyone else. And in the medieval world, he probably did. You want a job? Great. Just pick one from the thriving medieval classifieds. Let's see, you could rake manure, skin rodents, ring the town's plague bell, or carry buckets of sewage through a winding street full of shouting fishmongers and angry chickens. Dream big. Employment in the Middle Ages isn't about ambition, it's about endurance. You don't get to pursue your passion. You do what your parents did, or what your lord demands, or whatever horrifying gap in the workforce no one else was willing to touch. And yes, sometimes that means literally touching things no one should ever touch. Let's start with dung collector. Every village needs one. That's the person who walks around collecting human and animal waste to be used as fertilizer. You carry a bucket. It sloshes. The smell follows you like a bad memory. People avoid eye contact. But they need you. You're essential. Just not exactly celebrated. Then there's the rat catcher. Armed with a stick, a bag, and questionable decision-making skills, you crawl into dark corners, chase rodents out of bakeries, and occasionally wrestle with nests the size of small dogs. Sometimes you bring ferrets. Sometimes you bring nothing but raw determination and a tolerance for scratches. Want something more performative? You could be the town crier. You walk through muddy streets shouting news, laws, and general announcements. Rain or shine. Happy or grim. When there's a hanging, you're the one announcing it. When a new tax arrives, you get to be the face of disappointment. People love to yell at you for things you didn't do. Or maybe you're more into the spiritual side of things. You could be a bell ringer during the plague. You walk ahead of a dead cart, ringing your bell and crying, "Bring out your dead." This is not a joke. This is your job. And no, they don't give you gloves. Historians still debate how widespread and official some of these roles were, especially the more grotesque ones. But one thing's clear, unpleasant jobs were necessary. Someone had to do them. And that someone was almost never paid well, respected, or remembered. You could become a tanner. You work with animal hides. Sounds rustic, right? Until you realize that the process involves soaking skins in a mixture of urine, lime, and, you guessed it, a manure. For days. The smell is legendary. Towns often banished tanneries to the outskirts, not for moral reasons, but because people couldn't breathe within 5 streets of one. Or perhaps you're a gong farmer. Yes, that's a real title. You dig out cesspits. At night. By hand. It's as bad as it sounds. And once again, crucial. Because if no one does it, the whole town becomes a disease theme park. You shovel the stuff into carts, haul it out, and dump it wherever someone said over there is fine. Usually near crops. It's the circle of life, just with more flies. Looking for something indoor? How about a fulling mill apprentice? You spend your day stomping wet cloth in barrels filled with urine. Why? To clean and thicken the fabric. You do this barefoot. It's intimate. Or you could enter the exciting world of chimney sweeping if you're small enough. In some places, boys were sent into chimneys to scrape soot and whatever else was lurking in the flue. It's dark. It's claustrophobic. And no one's checking the air quality. Need a seasonal gig? Try scarecrow duty. Stand in a field, wave your arms, shout at birds. For hours. In the sun. While farmers occasionally throw you crusts of bread and children try to poke you with sticks. Glamorous. And if you're really down on your luck? Professional mourner. You're paid to weep at funerals. Loudly. Performatively. Doesn't matter if you knew the person, your sobbing sets the mood. Bonus points if you can wail convincingly without drying out your eyes too fast. Of course, some people get more than normal jobs. Blacksmiths, weavers, carpenters. Skilled trades that require apprenticeships and years of training. You might spend a decade learning how to make horseshoes, or barrels, or lute strings. It's honest work. But still hard, still repetitive, and still underpaid, unless you're lucky enough to work in a bustling town with patrons who don't try to pay you in eggs. Women? They have jobs too. Mostly unpaid. You spin wool, bake bread, raise children, tend gardens, and care for animals. If you're a widow, maybe you run a small alehouse or mend clothes. If you're unmarried and bold, maybe you become a midwife, respected, feared, and occasionally accused of witchcraft if someone doesn't like your bedside manner. Quirky detail? In some places, there was an actual official called an ale conner whose job was to test the quality of beer by sitting in it. If the bench stuck to his leather trousers after drying, it meant the beer had too much sugar. Science. So, what's your career path? Maybe you're born to toil in the fields. Maybe you catch rats, tan hides, or ring a funeral bell before breakfast. You're not climbing any ladders. There are no ladders. Just ropes, and most of them are frayed and tied to a bucket of someone else's waste. Still, you keep going. Because there's no choice. Because someone has to do it. Because survival, in your world, is the only full-time job, and it's always hiring. You kneel in church, again. The wooden bench creaks beneath your knees. A soft cough echoes 2 pews behind. Candles flicker like nervous fireflies, casting long shadows on the stone walls. You cross yourself out of habit, not thought. You don't know the Latin the priest is chanting, but you murmur your amens with everyone else. Because here, in the flickering gloom of stained glass and incense, you're not just hoping for a better life. You're betting everything on the afterlife. Medieval life, if you haven't noticed by now, isn't exactly a wellness retreat. Pain, hunger, injustice, and filth have become background noise. So what keeps people going? Why don't they all just wander off into the forest and start screaming at trees? Because of heaven. You are taught, from birth to burial, that this world is fleeting. Temporary. A trial. A grim obstacle course designed to test your faith and purify your soul. And if you endure it all, obedient, humble, devout, you might, just might, earn eternal paradise. Streets of gold. No hunger. No pain. No lords with taxes. No wolves. Just bliss and light and maybe even clean drinking water. The church doesn't just suggest this. It controls it. Every aspect of your life, from how you eat to how you think, is shaped by the looming weight of salvation. You confess weekly. You tithe. You attend Mass. You light candles and murmur prayers to saints whose names you barely remember. Because what if you don't? What if you miss a fast day? What if you swear when your sheep runs away? What if you forget to cross yourself during a thunderstorm? Hell, that's what. Literal hell. Fire, brimstone, demons with questionable dental hygiene. You've seen the paintings. You've heard the sermons. Eternal punishment for temporary mistakes. Historians still debate how much of this fear was internalized and how much was imposed from the pulpit. But for you, it doesn't feel like a debate. It feels like a constant pressure. Like walking a tightrope across a pit of screaming souls. One wrong move, and you're toast. And then there's purgatory, an endless waiting room full of smoke and sighing. If you're not quite good enough for heaven, but not bad enough for hell, that's where you go. To burn off the rest of your sins. Slowly. Uncomfortably. Like spiritual composting. Naturally, there's a market for shortcuts. You can buy indulgences, a kind of heavenly coupon that reduces your time in purgatory. Can't afford one? Too bad. But maybe your Lord buys one for you. Maybe. After all, a pious peasant is a productive one. You've seen people flagellate themselves in the town square, whips cracking on bare skin in the hopes that pain now means peace later. You've seen people crawl for miles on bleeding knees to reach a shrine. You don't question it. You can't afford to. Even your suffering becomes currency. Did your crops fail? That's a test of faith. Did your child die? God has a plan. Did you get smallpox after helping a neighbor? Maybe it was penance. Or maybe you're just cursed and didn't realize it. The saints become your emotional support team. Saint Anthony for lost things. Saint Apollonia for toothaches. Saint Barbara for sudden death. Saint Dymphna for when everything feels like too much, which is, let's face it, most days. You whisper their names like passwords. You touch relics. You hope something hears you. Quirky tidbit? In some parts of Europe, people baked little soul cakes and handed them out to the poor in exchange for prayers for their dead. Spiritual outsourcing, one cookie at a time. You don't question the system. You don't have the tools to. There's no Reddit thread for medieval doubt. No casual agnosticism. The church is the center of knowledge, power, law, and medicine. You don't know what's on the other side of the mountain, let alone the theological complexities of salvation. But even within this rigid framework, you find meaning. The rhythm of the calendar, feast days, saints' days, Lent, Advent, offers structure. Celebrations, even quiet ones, give you something to look forward to. You sing hymns not just out of fear, but because they're beautiful. You help your neighbor because it's good. You kiss your child goodnight and whisper a blessing because it makes you feel something close to safe. And when your body aches, when the fields are frozen, when the sky turns strange and your roof leaks and your stomach growls, you look up. Not for rain. For reassurance. Maybe someone is listening. Maybe this isn't all there is. Maybe the pain and the dung and the never-ending cold are just the first act. And what comes next will be worth it. Because honestly, if it isn't, you don't want to know. So you fold your hands. You bow your head. And you believe. The cough that's been lingering for weeks is worse now. You wake up wheezing, the cold morning air stabbing at your lungs like a handful of dull knives. Your chest is tight. Breathing feels like dragging a cart uphill. But there's no time to rest. You still have to feed the goats. Or sweep the hearth. Or mend the roof. Or all three. Because in the Middle Ages, you don't retire. You don't get medical leave. You work until you physically can't, and even then, someone might still hand you a shovel. You think you're around 35. Maybe 40. The exact number is fuzzy. No one wrote it down. Your mother used to say you were born during that bad barley year, but there have been at least 4 of those since then. Truth is, you're old by local standards. You've outlived 3 winters most of your childhood friends didn't. Your back hurts. Your teeth are few. Your vision is fading, and your knees make noises like snapping twigs. But you're still here. For now. You hobble to the well and nod at a boy carrying firewood. You don't recognize him. That happens more and more. New faces. People growing up while you weren't looking. You used to be the one helping elders across puddles. Now you are the elder. Puddle optional. You used to think you'd die in battle. Or in a fire. Or from the plague. Something dramatic. But no, it looks like your exit will be less headline-worthy. Just one breath too short, one fever too long, one slow fade while everyone keeps working around you. Historians still argue whether the average life expectancy was truly in the 30s, or if that number's skewed by infant mortality. Some adults lived into their 50s or even 60s. But few did so comfortably. And fewer still without carrying decades of pain in their joints and ghosts in their memory. There's no pension. No gravestone. No eulogy. When you're gone, the village priest might mumble a few words over your body, if he's not drunk or distracted. Your neighbors will nod solemnly, then go back to plowing. Because the wheat doesn't mourn. Your body will be wrapped in cloth. No coffin. No shoes. Just whatever spare sheet your family can offer. You'll be buried outside the churchyard if there's no room, or if you died of something contagious. And within days, someone else will be sleeping in your spot. Stirring the same pot. Feeding the same chickens. Life doesn't pause. It doesn't even slow down. You once watched your cousin disappear into the woods and never come back. You still think about him sometimes. You hope your disappearance feels different. A little more noticed. A little more grieved. But you don't expect it. That's not how it works here. And yet, even now, there's a weird kind of peace in the simplicity of it all. You were born. You worked. You suffered. You laughed more than you thought you would. You danced once, in the rain. You kissed someone behind a barn and felt young for exactly 7 minutes. You existed. Quirky tidbit? Some villages reused graves after a few years, especially if no one remembered who was buried there. Bones were stacked in ossuaries, tiny chapels filled with skulls and femurs, arranged like some eerie sculpture garden. You visited one once. Said hello to no one in particular. And now, you wonder, will someone say hello to you? Maybe. Maybe not. But for the moment, you're still here. The sun is rising. The chickens are clucking. Someone's baking bread, and it smells like memory. You rub your hands together. You step into the day. One more. Maybe 2. You never know. So here you are now, standing at the quiet edge of it all. The fires have burned low. The tools are hung. The streets, muddy, uneven, full of old footprints, have gone silent beneath a slow, silvery moon. You feel it, don't you? That aching stillness after so much noise. So much weight. You've carried your way through sickness and sermons, famine and frostbite, absurd laws and impossible labor. You've held that heavy medieval world in your hands, and somehow you didn't drop it. It's strange, isn't it? How something so brutal could feel so intimate by the end. The scratch of wool against skin. The creak of a wooden bench. The rasp of bread crust between your teeth. These small, uncomfortable things, they were life. Uncelebrated. Unglamorous. And so real. And now, you get to let them go. You're not cold anymore. Your hands are clean. Your roof doesn't leak. No one's asking you to shovel waste or explain where the grain went or fetch herbs by moonlight because the fevers come again. The pigs aren't your problem tonight. You're somewhere softer now. You can imagine it if you want to, a warm hearth that doesn't smoke, a bed that doesn't itch, silence without dread. Just the hush of safety. Just the relief of enough. You were forgotten once. But not this time. Because now, someone told your story. And someone listened. So rest easy, traveler. You've made it out of the mud, through the fire, past the church bells and the knighthood nonsense and the freezing nights with no names on gravestones. You made it through all 27 turns of this crooked wheel. And maybe, just maybe, you're a little more grateful now for soft pillows, hot showers, and an internet connection that doesn't depend on the wind. So breathe in slowly. Let the dark wrap gently around your shoulders like the world finally exhaled. Sleep well. You earned it.